The bus broke down at the worst possible moment. She couldn't afford to be late, so she ran, skillfully leaping over the huge puddles thinly coated with ice. But on the last, smallest puddle, she slipped and fell. She exhaled, trying not to panic, and after dusting herself off, she continued on. She knocked on the door, and Clark answered. "You are late, Melinda," he said without anger. "Sorry, Clark. The bus broke down. I was in a hurry." But you fell." "Yeah. How did you know?" "Your knees are all dirty. Anyway, I have to go. Clean up and wait for me. I'll be back in about an hour." The girl decided to wash her pants, and upon seeing a hole on the right leg, she felt dismayed. "Oh God, why is luck never on my side? This month, I plan to spend the money I earned on medicine for Grandma, not on clothes." Tears welled up in her eyes from a sense of helplessness. Grandma was the closest person to her, who loved her just because, not for anything else. She had plenty of time. She cleaned this 3-room apartment quickly, so she could have tea with sandwiches, especially since the owner sometimes allowed her to snack there. Melinda happily stretched out her legs, turned on some music, and smiled. For over 3 months now, she had been cleaning the apartments of wealthy people. She had 3 clients of such caliber. If only her parents could see her having tea with sandwiches. But they weren't destined to see it, because they passed away a year ago. She and her grandmother were left alone. Due to nerve issues, she lost her legs and was now confined to a wheelchair. That's why Melinda dropped out of medical school after her first year and started working. For 6 months, they lived on her grandmother's pension until a neighbor found her a job cleaning for wealthy people. Melinda had 2 3-room apartments and 1 5-room apartment. She cleaned almost all day in the latter and came home feeling drained. But now Melinda was earning well, and she and her grandmother had climbed out of debt. Her clients sometimes gave her groceries and gifts for the holidays. She felt connected to their comfortable lives. On the table where she drank her tea lay a $100 bill, her pay for the day. Clark was always satisfied. He was 12 years older than her, a man who owned a network of appliance repair shops. This time, she finished cleaning right on time. She had just sat down to rest when she heard the key turn in the door. "Are you finished cleaning?" the owner asked. "Yes, I just finished. I'll leave now." "You're not bothering me. I bought all sorts of food. Let's have dinner together and take something with you." "No, thank you. I had a sandwich, so I'm not hungry." "What kind of food is that?" "Come on, unpack the bags, and we'll have dinner together. Then I'll drive you home. Otherwise, you're all in dirty clothes." "Thank you, Clark. I feel really uncomfortable. And where did you buy all this? There are so many bags here." "I stopped by the restaurant." She felt that the man was showing too much interest in her. She liked and disliked it at the same time. It was nice to receive compliments from such an interesting man. But Melinda had a boyfriend, and she was afraid that Clark might overstep boundaries, forcing her to leave this house. After dinner, she had to clear the table. Putting on her wet jeans, which hadn't dried yet, she got into the car. She came home with $100 and a bag of groceries. Having done all her household chores, Melinda went straight to bed because she was tired, and tomorrow she had to clean a 5-room apartment. Before falling asleep, she thought about her grandmother, about her treatment, and memories flooded her mind, memories that could drive her crazy. Perhaps with time, she would be able to perceive more calmly that period when her parents died under terrible circumstances. That dreadful day, which divided the high school student's life into before and after. She remembered poorly. The church, the cemetery, the closed coffins. Everything was like in a fog. They held her grandmother from both sides, but they couldn't hold her back. She struggled to open the coffin to say goodbye to her son. The police advised against it. The faces of the bodies were so disfigured that a mother's heart might not withstand it. Then there were the funerals, and after some time, the killers were found. They were 3 thugs, with a criminal appearance. Later, the investigator told her roughly how things stood. Mom and Dad were gathering mushrooms in the forest, heading back to the car along a narrow trail when they saw three big men breaking the windows, pulling out their car's GPS and stereo. Her dad was always very brave, but he couldn't handle three men. He died instantly from a stab wound right to the heart. Then they slashed his face. Her mom was stabbed. She died from blood loss. Melinda was grateful to her mom's friend for coming for a few days and helping her through the toughest moments. Before leaving, she offered Melinda to go with her, but the girl couldn't leave her grandmother, saying that everything would be fine and she would manage. But she didn't. She managed. Soon, her grandmother couldn't get up. Her legs didn't obey and couldn't hold her. So, the girl's life turned upside down. Now she had to believe only in herself. She instantly matured by about 10 years, making the hardest decision of her life to leave the college she had dreamed of since kindergarten. She had to take care of her grandmother, who looked at her with guilty eyes but couldn't help. Melinda Stewart was a diligent girl. Her beautiful thick long hair, which she always tied in a tight ponytail, was always envied. She was an Eastern beauty. The oval face, the eyes, everything resembled the East. Her plump lips resembled ripe cherries and made older boys' eyes sparkle when they saw her. But she never boasted about it. Her mom always told her that it's okay to be proud of what she achieved herself. And this was all given to her by nature, and she didn't put any effort into it. Melinda took this lesson to heart and was a simple and kind girl. And when she lost her parents, she forgot how to look in the mirror. There wasn't enough time. But when Mrs. Thomas, her neighbor, introduced her to Clark, he was amazed by her appearance and immediately agreed to take her on at work. Of course, he wasn't lacking in women, but this budding flower required special care. Clark was a desirable bachelor, tall, with light wavy hair that was always well groomed, and a light stubble that gave him a special charm. Thick eyebrows made him seem a bit stern at first glance, but that was deceiving. He knew how to have fun, be considerate, and gentle. At 30, he was still unmarried, searching for that one person with whom he could share both sorrow and joy. Mrs. Thomas, his former housekeeper, told him Melinda's story, and he helped Melinda as much as he could, trying not to reveal his feelings for this Eastern beauty. Sometimes, he overheard her talking to someone named Dylan. Her voice softened, even became playful, leading Clark to conclude that Dylan was her boyfriend. "Melinda, why are you standing still?" The voice of the owner from the 5-room apartment, Mrs. Gregg, brought her back from her memories. "Sorry, I was thinking about my parents." "You can think about your parents at home. It's time to finish cleaning. And you haven't even cleaned the bath yet." "I'll finish in my own time and won't keep you waiting," Melinda said. Mrs. Gregg was acquainted with Clark. She liked the girl, modest and honest. Mrs. Gregg often gave her nice things, for which Melinda was grateful. Today's cleaning was thorough. Tomorrow the hostess was expecting guests, so everything had to sparkle. But at the end of the cleaning, she paid Melinda a very good sum. "Thank you, dear. Don't be upset with me. I know I can be harsh sometimes, but I appreciate your honesty and hard work. Here, take this. There's a bit of groceries in there." Mrs. Gregg handed her a bag. "Thank you." Overwhelmed with emotions, Melinda hugged the woman and burst into tears. There, no need to cry. You're such a good girl, coping with the burden that's fallen on you. I understand, losing parents under such circumstances is terrible, but I'm sure, with your fighting spirit, everything will be fine." Melinda looked at her with tear-filled eyes, nodded, and said goodbye. A quiet, sunny November morning approached. Melinda peeled her eyes away from her phone's screen and leaned back in her chair, gazing at the trees and houses flashing by the bus window. Today, she was heading to clean the second 3-room apartment, owned by the elderly Mrs. Sophie O'Brien. She was 65, looked wonderful, and was wealthy. Her apartment resembled a museum, filled with antique books, dishes, furniture, and beautiful icons. The husband of this remarkable woman was a high-class jeweler. He died at his desk, admiring his finished work. The autopsy revealed that his heart had stopped. It's been 5 years since then, and the events of those days gradually faded from memory. But Mrs. O'Brien missed him at first. She missed his voice, his laughter, his jokes, and their evening chats over a cup of tea. But all that was in the past. The feeling that he had left her disappeared because he started appearing in her dreams every night. Cheerful, handsome. She would chat with him for a long time, laughing, as if he hadn't left her. He even gave advice on what to sell and what not to, where to invest money. And she listened to him, and every time he turned out to be right. Mrs. O'Brien didn't tell anyone about her dreams, fearing they would take her to a mental hospital. Today she was waiting for Melinda, who was recommended to her. She was very young, and Mrs. O'Brien liked her very much. On the day of her arrival, the woman always ordered something delicious from the restaurant, usually a cake or pastries. And after cleaning, they both sat happily in the dining room and talked. Melinda asked a lot of questions and listened very attentively to Mrs. O'Brien. The landlady not only had life experience, but was also a psychologist with vast experience. And she still practiced a little. Not for the money, but because she missed communication, missed people. Melinda loved this apartment the most. Here, no one ever rushed her or shouted at her. She wasn't afraid that someone might cross the line. Mrs. O'Brien reminded her of her grandmother. Kind and caring. Peace, quiet, and cleanliness reigned in her home. The girl couldn't understand why you would need to clean in an already clean apartment. Mrs. O'Brien, your place is so clean. Maybe I should come once a week. Why spend extra money? What, dear? Don't you need money? Of course, I do. So clean, my dear. Can't you see how much dust there is? Then they would have dinner, drink tea. The woman wouldn't let Melinda go home late alone. She would call a taxi for her. She would even invite the taxi driver up, give him money, and ask him to safely deliver her home. So these three people, appearing at a very difficult moment in the young girl's life, each play their role, participating in events that will test Melinda's resilience. Finally, Melinda was on her way home. The taxi was picking up speed, and she, closing her eyes, let the wind blow on her face through the narrow gap in the partially open window. A phone call interrupted her thoughts, and she thought it might be Dylan. Melinda, hey, Dylan said. Hi, Dylan. The girl was glad to hear the young man. Where are you? I'm on my way home. I wanted to invite you for a walk. I'd love to, but I'm very tired. How about Saturday? I'm off work, and we can meet then. I'll be busy at the college on Saturday. Something interesting is coming up. Oh, what's that? I won't rush things yet. Let's wait another week. They ended the conversation when the taxi stopped at Melinda's building. Saying goodbye, she went up to the apartment. Grandma, I'm home. We'll have dinner now. But there was no response. Her palms became sweaty with worry, and she hurried into the room. Her grandmother was lying on the floor, and the armchair was overturned. Grandma, can you hear me? Melinda quickly dialed the emergency number. They arrived fairly quickly, and by that time, the woman had regained consciousness. Pray to God, the doctor said, that the worst won't be confirmed. A fractured hip. It's a serious injury that can cause many complications, especially for elderly people. They carried her grandmother out on a stretcher, and the ambulance took her to the hospital. After the X-ray, the doctor's concerns were confirmed. Her grandmother felt unwell. She felt nauseous and dizzy. She seems to have a concussion too, the nurse said. Melinda didn't cry, although she wanted to. She was trembling. How will you get home in this condition? Do you have someone to call to pick you up? The doctor asked. She nodded. Melinda took out her phone and decided to call Dylan. Dylan, Can you come for me? Grandma's in the hospital, and I can't get home alone in this condition. No, dear, I can't, he said, winking at the blonde sitting opposite him with a glass of wine. I'm at the college for a project consultation. Okay, she said and hung up. She had some money with her, but she felt reluctant to spend it on a taxi. After all, that money would be needed for medicine. She slowly got up and made her way to the exit. Suddenly, her phone rang. Melinda, it's Clark. Hey, could you come to me tomorrow morning? He didn't finish, as the girl interrupted him. No, my grandma is in the hospital. I can't. She barely managed to reply. Where are you now? Clark asked, sounding concerned. At the hospital. Wait for me. I'm coming. He replied shortly. Clark had just finished a meeting and quickly came to help Melinda. So, how's your grandma? He asked. Not good. She fell and broke her hip and got a concussion. Melinda replied. Stay here. I'll go find out everything myself. He got up and walked down the corridor. In the doctor's office, he found the attending physician. Do you have a private room? Can you arrange for a caregiver? Clark asked. Yes, but it's expensive. But we can work something out. Who are you so worried about? The doctor inquired. Carolyn Stewart. She was brought here today. Understood. Okay. We'll take care of everything. Melinda started to worry because Clark was gone for so long. But when she saw him, she rushed to meet him. Clark, how's grandma? Nothing new for now, but she's been moved to a private room, and there will be a caregiver for her. Here's a pass for you, so you can come at any time convenient for you. She hugged him around the neck, and he stopped breathing, tensed up, froze, as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. He didn't know what to do with his hands, but then he gently hugged her around the back. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Let's go. I'll take you home. She nodded and obediently followed him. As Clark pulled onto the road, Melinda suddenly realized she was glad to see him. So reliable and tender. Next to him, she stopped trembling, and her hands became warm. She glanced at him, and although Clark was attentively watching the road, he felt her gaze, took her hand with his own, and squeezed it. Don't worry. Thank you so much, Clark. I understand that a private room and a caregiver cost money, so I'll clean your place for free. That way I can pay you back. Don't talk nonsense. It's not difficult for me at all, and it's nice to help a good person. Right now, the most important thing is to get your grandma healed. Finally, he looked at her and winked. In response, she smiled. It was such a small gesture for everything he had done for her. On Saturday morning, Melinda went to see her grandmother in the hospital. Her grandmother was feeling unwell. She had had a high fever all night, and in the morning, she was completely exhausted. Melinda, sit down. I'm glad to see you. How are you? Her grandmother greeted her. Grandma, it doesn't matter. Tell me, how are you? Why did you fall? Melinda replied. I wanted to lie down. My back got tired from sitting in the chair all day. But it didn't work out. I want to talk to you. I know you don't like these conversations, but I have to tell you. I have a bad feeling. I won't recover from this. Bury me next to Julian, your dad. Grandma, why are you scaring me? Understand, as hard as it is for me now, it will be very bad without you. I don't even have anyone to consult with. I understand. It's scary to realize that you're forever separated from a dear person, but you haven't done everything on this earth yet. When you marry me off, when you see great-grandchildren, then we'll return to this topic. Okay. We have to fight. I have no strength to fight. All my reserves of strength went away with Julian. It's time for me to go to him. You're smart. You'll be fine. There's clothes in my closet with a letter on it. You'll read it when I'm gone. Don't cry. Everyone has their own reserves of strength and energy. I've used them all up, but life is better. Death itself is repulsive, abnormal, Unnatural. You say that because you are still very young, and your whole life is ahead of you. But I've lived mine. Don't worry. I'm not afraid. I'm tired, dear. And her grandmother closed her eyes. The girl took her grandmother's hand, and they sat in silence for a long time, understanding each other perfectly. On Sunday, she visited her grandmother again, and once more they talked at length about life and death. Melinda left feeling downcast. She longed to share with someone, to seek advice on how to support her grandmother and bring back her zest for life. Although she understood that after losing her son, there was a great sadness weighing on her heart, she decided to call Dylan. He would surely comfort her. Dylan. Hey, she said. Hey, how's your grandmother? Is she feeling better? He asked. No, everything is still bad. She replied, sniffing. Are you crying? Could we meet today? I'd tell you everything in detail. She requested. No, Melinda, I'm busy at the college. Send my regards to your grandmother. I'll call later. He said. Goodbye, Melinda said sadly, thinking that nobody cared about other people's problems. Her grandmother didn't like Dylan. She called him slippery and unpleasant. He's not your type. He's looking for where it's more profitable, richer, her grandmother had said. But he likes me. He told me himself. Melinda insisted. She noticed that Dylan had changed a lot lately. While she was talking on the phone, she walked far from the bus stop and decided to work until the next one. Her grandmother's words about having no strength to live and fight kept echoing in her head. She walked leisurely past a building when suddenly, through the large window of a restaurant, she saw Dylan. He looked cheerful, not like someone who was consulting with anyone. She quickly dialed his number. Yes, dear, he answered. Are you still not free? She asked. No, I'm working late today. He accidentally turned his head and saw Melinda. Are you stalking me? He joked. No, of course not. I'm walking home from the hospital, just taking a stroll. And it seems your plans have changed, and consultations are happening right in the restaurant. She replied. Melinda, you're not my wife. He retorted. Thank goodness for that. I'm once again amazed by my grandmother's insight. She replied. I never liked your grandmother either. He remarked. Don't talk about my grandmother like that. All right. Looks like your girlfriend is getting bored. Goodbye. She felt hurt that she was being led on like a silly girl, when she had already fallen in love. Once again, her grandmother turned out to be right. She ran as fast as if she was chasing a departing bus, but the run calmed her a little. When she got home, Melinda let her tears flow freely. Sitting on the couch, wrapped in the embrace of a large pillow, she cried all evening. Melinda realized she was exhausted. She just wanted to go to bed. That was her only wish. After such a difficult day, she wanted to relax a bit. The girl's first morning passed in solitude. As far back as she could remember, her grandmother had always been present in their family. Melinda's father, Julian, she raised alone, and she raised him to be a real man, unafraid of difficulties and able to take responsibility. So when he brought home Mary, a girl from the orphanage, to introduce her to his mother, Melinda's mom understood from his eyes that arguing was pointless. Her son would do things his way. She didn't immediately accept Mary, but when her granddaughter was born, peace and tranquility descended upon the family. The small, brightest and warmest room became the nursery. Melinda still slept there. Her father always earned good money, offering her mother the chance to stay home with the child. But despite her love for her daughter, she didn't want to stay home. She yearned to work. Melinda stood by the window, holding a small cup of coffee and watching winter approach. Once ready, she headed to work. Today, she was cleaning for Clark. She approached his apartment and pressed the doorbell. After a short ring, Clark opened the door right away. Come in. You look tired, he said. No, everything's fine, she replied. Your eyes give you away. You're smiling, but your eyes are crying, he remarked. He helped her out of her coat and invited her to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. "Melinda, don't clean the apartment today. It's already clean. But I'll pay you anyway," he said. She jumped up from her chair. "Why are you humiliating me? If it's clean, I'll leave, and I don't need your money. I already feel indebted to you," she said, rushing to the hallway to grab her coat and dress quickly. "Forgive me. I didn't realize my offer would upset you so much. Tell me about your grandmother. How is she?" Taking her coat from her hands, he led her back to the kitchen. "Things aren't good with my grandmother. She doesn't want to live and is already prepared to meet my dad. None of my pleas or even tears help. The doctors say she must want to fight on her own. Then the illness will retreat." She spoke about her beloved grandmother, and he looked at her face. The more he looked, the more he wanted to keep looking. It seemed that during her time working for him, he had already studied her. But now, as he looked at her, he noticed something new. She had matured. Her eyes had become sad, her lips just as enticing, their natural cherry color a bright spot on her pale face. Her hair was loose, falling in large curls on her shoulders. Looking at this very young girl, he, an adult man, felt something more. He wanted to touch her, to caress her, to protect her. But she was not like everyone else, and she might be scared of that. "Tell me everything that's troubling you," he said. She rarely shared her innermost thoughts with anyone, as her grandmother taught her not to bare her soul to people she didn't know well. Did Clark really need to know? She shook her head and simply cried. He wanted to hold her, comfort her, kiss her, but he didn't because she needed to feel safe here. Clark poured coffee into cups and set sandwiches on the table. "Come on, have breakfast, or you won't have the energy to clean. If I don't make it back before you finish, you know where to leave the keys," he said. "Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Clark. Hang in there, kid. Don't let yourself break." And he left. Clearing the table, she began her usual task, but today she didn't feel like listening to music, and she didn't feel like cleaning. But she needed the money. The money was lying on the table again, and she could only take it after finishing her work. Putting on gloves, she started cleaning. She rarely dreamed, often so tired that she slept like a log. But this morning was different. Melinda woke up in a state of intense excitement, with fragments of phrases floating in her head, scenes from a black and white movie. She stared fearfully at the ceiling, trying to come to her senses. Her rapid breathing sharpened her memory, and flashes from the dream appeared before her eyes. A hospital bed. Her grandmother, the girl holding her grandmother's hands. The grandmother unresponsive to anything. It became frightening, and she needed time to calm down. Yesterday, she finished cleaning Clark's apartment a little earlier and didn't wait for him. She hurried to her grandmother. She couldn't talk to her, as she was sleeping, and the doctors gave no prognosis, with the main reason for her poor condition being her refusal of treatment. Remembering the doctor's words, the girl didn't know what to do. Melinda had breakfast in complete silence. Today, she was going to Mrs. Gregg's, and she wouldn't be able to visit her grandmother until the evening. But she was determined to visit her. "Hello, Mrs. Gregg. Are you off somewhere?" Melinda asked, seeing the landlady with a bag. "I wanted to go to the store and buy some groceries." "Well, go ahead, and I'll start cleaning now." "I heard about your grandmother, Melinda. I'm very sorry. I have an acquaintance at the hospital, a surgeon. I'll call him and ask for help." "Is that doctor's name Preston Faust?" "Yes, Preston. We grew up in the same neighborhood, and now he's become a famous surgeon. But he hasn't gotten conceited," she said and hurried off to the store. Melinda's mood lifted slightly. She thought everything would work out now. Mrs. Gregg would ask the doctor, and he would pay more attention to her grandmother. She eagerly started working. Soon, the landlady returned from the store, unpacked the groceries, and immediately called Preston. Surprisingly, he picked up right away and recognized his childhood friend. "Preston, hello." Alan, your voice is still as young. You've always known how to support women. Preston, there's a grandmother of a good girl in your department. I know who you're talking about. How is she? Just tell the truth. She passed away last night. I don't know how to break this to the poor girl. I'm sorry for her, but we couldn't do anything. Her body had no strength to fight the illness. Melinda heard Mrs. Gregg finish the call. She froze, hoping for good news. So, what did Preston say? Is there hope that Grandma will get better? Mrs. Gregg hugged the girl, holding her close. She was trembling, unable to find the right words to comfort her. Are you crying? Melinda asked, her voice trembling. I am, my dear, because I don't know how to tell you. What? Grandma is no longer here. Right, yes, my dear. She passed away peacefully, without pain. She just fell asleep, and that was it. It happens, Melinda. We're all mortal, and losing our loved ones is always hard. I don't know why so much has happened to you, but I'll help you. Don't worry. Mrs. Gregg gave her hot tea, and gradually Melinda came to terms with the news. When she realized what had happened, she began to have a breakdown. Perhaps one cannot prepare for this, and such news always catches one off guard. After a huge dose of sedative, Melinda calmed down and even managed to doze off. There were few people at the funeral. 3 of her grandmother's friends, elderly ladies in their 70s, and neighbors attended. Then Clark arrived. He said that the memorial lunch would be at a small cafe, and he would cover the expenses. Thank you, Clark. I have the money. Grandma prepared everything. And please don't refuse because she wouldn't like it, Melinda said. Don't rush. You can pay me back when you can. Okay. She nodded. She liked how good words were spoken about her grandmother at the memorial, and only familiar faces were present. Your grandmother would be pleased. Mrs. Gregg approached her. You're a good girl, Melinda. Take this for now. Oh, come on. I have money. We should help each other. That's right, Melinda. Never refuse help. I understand. The girl replied and hugged Mrs. Gregg. After the memorial, Melinda went home. Now no one was waiting for her. After such a tough day, she wanted to go to bed immediately, to forget. She entered the apartment, took off her shoes, and suddenly heard some rustling. She stopped and listened. It seemed like someone was walking in the kitchen. Who's there? She shouted into the void, but no one answered. Quickly turning on the light in the whole apartment, she felt more comfortable and climbed under the covers. But she couldn't close her eyes. She was scared. Grandma, you wouldn't scare me, would you? She asked silently, raising her eyes to the ceiling. Please, I'm already feeling bad enough. The last time she looked at the clock was 3 in the morning, and then she fell into an uneasy sleep. In the morning, she woke up to her mobile ringing. Darling, Mrs. O'Brien said in her affectionate voice. Will you come to me today? Fully awake now, Melinda jumped out of bed. I'm sorry. I overslept. I buried my grandmother yesterday. Yes, I know. My sincerest condolences to you. Thank you. I'll be there in an hour. Okay, I'll be waiting. The woman understood how difficult it must be for this girl right now. She decided to offer her to stay with her, but she knew Melinda would refuse. So, Mrs. O'Brien decided to use a little trickery, saying she felt unwell. It would be a sure win because the girl had a kind soul. Before Melinda's arrival, the woman lay in bed, with a compress on her forehead and medicine on the bedside table. Mrs. O'Brien's son lived in Sweden with his wife and 2 children. He got married early, moving to Sweden for an internship. His family never visited her, and she had no desire to fly to such a distant place as Sweden. But her son called regularly, asking about his mother's health. He inherited everything he was entitled to. He lived in his own large and wealthy house and wanted to move his mother to Sweden. But she refused. She was snapped out of her reminiscence by the doorbell. Putting on a mournful face and grimacing in pain, She opened the door. "Hello. Are you feeling unwell?" The girl asked. "Very, Melinda. I have a headache from the pressure. My heart is acting up. I don't know what to do. They advised me to hire a caregiver. And I'm thinking, whom to hire? Do you have anyone in mind? Maybe I could suit you. You would be perfect. Only I need you to live with me. Understand? Live with you. But I need to work. I won't be able to be with you all the time." "Well, you'll work 3 to 4 hours. It's nothing to worry about. And the rest of the time, you'll be with me." "Then I agree. Honestly, I'm so scared to live alone after my grandmother's death. Someone is walking around the apartment. Or I imagine it." "Well, that's good. Let's have you rent out your apartment. And you'll have some extra money. Let's say, for 6 months. And then we'll see," she said, seeing the joy in the girl's eyes. "I like this idea." Mrs. O'Brien wanted to get up, take off the compress from her forehead, and offer some drinks for a successful deal. But she caught herself just in time. "I'll go lie down, darling." "Yes, yes. Go rest, and I'll start cleaning," Melinda said, caring. Opening her eyes in the morning, Melinda didn't immediately understand where she was. Surveying the room with sleepy eyes, she didn't see her simple floral wallpaper, the familiar chandelier, and only then remembered that she was at Mrs. O'Brien's. The hands of the beautiful antique clock were approaching 8 in the morning. She quickly got dressed and left the room. Mrs. O'Brien, wearing a beautiful apron, was preparing breakfast and humming to herself. "Are you feeling better?" Melinda asked. "Yes. Don't worry. I took my medicine. Everything's fine," Mrs. O'Brien replied. "So, you don't need a caregiver anymore?" "What do you mean?" "I still need one," she said, swaying for credibility. "Oh, Melinda, sit me down. I feel dizzy." They had breakfast, chatted about nothing in particular, and both were happy. "Melinda, you need to think about your education. It's time to return to life. I believe both your parents and your grandmother wanted only the best for you. Bring your textbooks and everything you need from home to start preparing for college. I need to figure out how to combine studying with work. That's unlikely. Medical school is serious. It requires preparation that takes time. So, I'll continue to pay you for cleaning. You'll get rent from tenants, so you'll have money, and you should only focus on your studies." "Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. The Lord sent you to me. He sent you to me." "Thank you, dear." Melinda helped O'Brien rent out the apartment. She rented it out for good money. When Mrs. O'Brien mentioned the amount to Melinda, she couldn't believe her ears. "Will I be getting this much every month?" she asked in surprise. "Of course, you need to update your wardrobe. You're such a beauty, and your clothes should match," Mrs. O'Brien replied. "Also, let Clark know that you won't be working for him anymore. He'll have to find someone else." "Yes, I'll talk to him today. I need to give him back the money." Clark was waiting for Melinda, and for some reason, he was more nervous today than ever before. She arrived, as always, fresh, beautiful, with a blush on her cheeks. But her eyes were still sad. "Hello, Clark. I brought you the money. Thank you so much for your help," Melinda said. "Melinda, why are you in such a hurry with this money?" Clark replied. "I don't like to owe. And I also wanted to tell you to find someone else to clean your apartment. I need to prepare for college, and I won't have any time," Melinda explained. "That's right. You need to study. If I'm completely honest, I'm sorry to see you go. Very sorry. I've got news to you. I really like you," Clark confessed. She sharply turned to him and looked at the man with her huge eyes. She hadn't expected her heart to beat so wildly, as if it was about to jump out and fall at her feet. And he continued. "I've been..." He began. She stopped him by holding out her hand and citing the need to make a call, then rushed to another room. "How are you feeling, Mrs. O'Brien?" Melinda asked over the phone. "What's wrong, dear? Is he upsetting you?" Mrs. O'Brien inquired. No, Melinda replied. He's confessing his love to you. And you're scared. Mrs. O'Brien guessed. Yes. How did you know? Melinda asked. I've lived a life, girl. Don't worry. Clark is a good man. He won't harm you, Mrs. O'Brien reassured her. But I don't love him, Melinda whispered into the phone. Don't worry about it. Finish your work and leave, Mrs. O'Brien advised. I understand, Melinda said. She stood for a moment, then returned to him. I'm ready to clean for you, she said, noticing the table filled with food again. You've spent a lot of money again. I always spend exactly as much as I can afford and on what I consider necessary. Don't worry, Clark assured her. She nodded as an apology for meddling. I have a favor to ask you. If I can't find a replacement for you, maybe you'll come back and help me out, he asked. Well, okay, I'll try, she agreed. I'm leaving. But think about what I said, he said before leaving. She stood with her eyes downcast, shaking her head. Don't worry, Clark, she murmured. He quickly stepped out, closing the door behind him. Today, Melinda wasn't in a hurry. There was no grandmother to rush for. She boiled the kettle and made herself some tea. Underneath her favorite box of candies lay the money she hadn't turned yet. Meanwhile, Clark was truly upset. He didn't want to dwell on how easily she had brushed him off. Well, dear, he thought, some women just don't like me. Too bad. I was almost smitten. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake off the melancholy. He wasn't a foolish man. He understood that dealing with this girl would be no easy task. And emotionally, it was impossible. She needed to grow up. Melinda, on the other hand, felt ungrateful. He had helped her so much, been involved in her and her grandmother's lives. Yet she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. She had finished tidying up the apartment a while ago, but the landlord hadn't shown up yet. Assuming he didn't want to see her, she began to gather her things to leave. However, Clark had indeed arrived at the building, waiting for Melinda to leave, not because he was offended, but because he didn't want to startle her or intrude. Seeing her leave, look around, and run for the bus, he went up to the apartment. Undressing, he entered the kitchen and noticed that she had forgotten the money on the table. He was even pleased, as it gave him an excuse to call her and hear her voice again. Melinda, you forgot your money on the table. Maybe I could drop it off to you, he said. Oh, I did forget. Well, I'll take it next time. I see. Well, I guess I'll see you next time. Thanks. Don't be mad at me, Clark. You're a really good person. But she didn't want to say she didn't love him. But I need to focus on my studies. Of course, you're right about everything. And no, I'm not mad, he assured her. Thank you. It means a lot to me to hear that from you. The girl's life changed. Mrs. O'Brien devoted a lot of time to her. They went to museums, theaters, and she asked her to read books aloud. She helped Melinda update her wardrobe and taught her about makeup and how to use it. You've been given a lot by nature, she told the girl. So you should just enhance your beauty a little. Use nude makeup. It's subtle, and its task is to highlight and refine your natural beauty, making your features more expressive. Then you'll always be the center of attention. Melinda listened to her. Mrs. O'Brien was her ideal. Smart, tactful, beautiful. At 65, she hadn't lost interest in life. Every time she looked in the mirror, the girl noticed changes. She started to like herself, something that had never happened before. Mrs. O'Brien said she was beautiful and insisted that Melinda knew it, but didn't get conceited. You should know your worth. Always behave dignified. Hold your head up high, but not be arrogant. Understand? The woman told her. Neither Clark nor Mrs. Gregg wanted to part with Melinda. Now she only went to clean their houses once a week, until she started her studies. Every 10 days, Mrs. O'Brien called a manicurist to her home. Melinda's hands also transformed, and after passing her exams and getting into college, Mrs. O'Brien gave her a delicate ring with a tiny diamond. It was her first gold ring, which she admired. "Thank you, dear Mrs. O'Brien. I really like it," she said. "You're welcome, dear. May it bring you happiness." On the first day of school, Mrs. O'Brien went with Melinda. She wanted to see who would surround her ward. "You go ahead, dear. I'll watch from the sidelines." Melinda nodded and headed towards the main building with everyone else. Mrs. O'Brien looked at the young people and was surprised by some of the girls whose skirts barely covered their buttocks, the kind you see in cheap bars. Mrs. O'Brien knew such girls. They were cheeky, capricious, with cute faces and short skirts, tempting rich men. Melinda, on the other hand, was different. She worked in an elegant pantsuit that fit her perfectly. Black, huge cars pulled up to the main building, from which the sons and daughters of wealthy parents emerged. They were dressed in expensive clothes, but their eyes were already bored. "And these are our future doctors, whom people will trust with themselves or their children." Melinda enjoyed studying. There was no stopping her when she returned from college. She would talk endlessly about the lectures, who taught them, who she met. She just couldn't stop. Mrs. O'Brien's life changed too. The energy, love, and attachment she had saved for her grandchildren were given without regret to this lovely girl. She loved her as her own. Melinda wouldn't let her do anything for her. She cleaned the apartment and cooked a little, but she refused to take any money. Sometimes Clark would call, asking how the freshman was doing, and he was very happy to hear that things were going great. But no matter how good Melinda looked and how beautiful she wasn't accepted into high society. The rich somehow found each other and stuck together. But one guy from this crowd dared to approach Melinda to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Matthew." "Hello." The girl blushed in response. "Are you heading home?" "Yes, I'll give you a ride. There's my car over there." Turning her head, she saw a white Mercedes, but she didn't have time to get into it. Melinda, turning around, she saw Dylan. "Sorry, Matthew. Another time maybe you'll give me a lift. I need to talk to an old friend. I guess he came to congratulate me on getting in." "Can I wait?" "No need. I don't know how long this congratulation will take." And Dylan watched this couple, noticing how cool this rich kid was, who had nothing to be proud of except his daddy's money. Melinda has changed a lot. She's even more beautiful now, dressing elegantly. And that suit, Dylan thought, straight out of a glossy magazine. But where does she get the money? His thoughts were interrupted by Melinda approaching. "Hello, dear," he said. "Don't call me that. I don't like it." "But you used to like it." Dylan's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, I used to like it because I thought it was sincere. But now I don't think so," she said. "You've changed. You're unrecognizable. A confident girl, a student at a prestigious university. And here I am, a loser, tripping over my own feet. Is that right?" Dylan raised his voice. "Don't shout. I'm not your wife, as you said yourself. So, I'm returning that phrase to you, reminding you that you are nobody to me. And that's fine." She was about to leave, but he grabbed her elbow. "Melinda, I'm sorry. I was wrong back then. I never forgot about you. I always liked you, and you know that." "Well, yes. Where were you with your love when Grandma was in the hospital? When I was struggling? Where were you when I was left alone after her death? And strangers, who didn't swear eternal love to me, just came to help? Where were you? And now you stand here and don't even look me in the eye." He truly had nothing to say to that. He was very busy applying for a grant for a year of study abroad. That's why he needed that blonde girl Melinda saw him with at the restaurant. He was among the top 10 candidates for it. And Susan, the rector's daughter, could help him with it. She could, but she didn't. He fell into depression, forgetting completely about Melinda and her need for his help. For a while, Susan went out with him to bars and expensive shops, but when Dylan ran out of money, she said he was boring and disappeared. That's when he remembered Melinda, who could listen to him, sympathize, and feed him. But he faced a big disappointment. That Melinda was gone, or rather, she was there, but not for him. I'm not looking at you because I'm truly guilty, but if you had listened to me, you'd understand how hard it was for me. It was hard for me too, but I managed without your help. So you won't even listen to me. You've always been kind. I'm still the same. It hasn't gone anywhere, but you don't deserve any of it. Where are you living now? You found me, but you don't know where I live. I met Mrs. Thomas. She told me you got into college, and the rest, if you want, you'll tell me yourself. I see. But I don't want you to know more about me than the fact that I got into college. That's it, Dylan. I'm tired. I'll go. Melinda. But I won't give up. Not to that rich guy. He pointed at Matthew, who was standing by the Mercedes, leaning against its door and watching them talk. I won't let him have you. You are taking too much on yourself. I'm not an object to be passed from hand to hand. I'll decide for myself who and where I want to talk to, she said. Dylan suddenly grabbed her hand, but caught sight of Matthew heading straight toward them. I'll call you. Give me another chance, and you won't regret it. Need any help? The approaching young man asked. No, Matthew. We're done. Can I still give you a ride? Well, yes. You've been waiting so long. It would be unfair to refuse you. And they headed toward the luxurious white car. So, where are we going, Mr. Matthew? The driver asked. Melinda, tell me your address. Dylan asked. Why did it take you so long? Mrs. O'Brien asked the girl. Melinda rushed into her arms and started crying. What happened? Did someone hurt you? No. Dylan came to the college. He apologized for not coming for so long. Said he also had difficulties, and he asked for a second chance. So why are you crying? I'm upset because he lied when I asked him for help. He lied about being at the college, about attending consultations, when he was actually at the restaurant with another girl. And I think I loved him. The key words are I think or loved. She knelt down beside the woman and didn't rush to answer. And Mrs. O'Brien didn't rush her. She stroked her hair and waited. You're right. The key word is I think. You're smart. Everything becomes clear in comparison. Were you close to him? No, we weren't. Well, that's good. If there's nothing tying you together, forget about him. I will. After the conversation with Mrs. O'Brien, Melinda couldn't sleep for a long time. They talked about relationships between men and women, about love and hate between them. Melinda got the impression that this woman knew everything in the world. She explained very complex life situations to the girl with such patience and kindness that Melinda listened with great fascination, absorbing every word, afraid to ask questions and interrupt the storyteller. Why did he come to me? He missed you, wanted to see Melinda again, but instead found a stranger. You're beautiful, a student at a prestigious college, and there's a wealthy guy nearby. He didn't know this side of you and wanted to get acquainted with you again, to explore. But you don't need that because you know what he can be like when he needs something. She remembered how they used to spend time together, going to the movies, sharing impressions of books they read, even visiting his friends. It all seemed like a past life to her now. Then Dylan changed a lot. Maybe she could try to go back to him. He's not a bad guy, right? But the nagging inner voice insisted that their relationship was over. And there's nothing worse than trying to revive something that died long ago. Dylan is a careerist, always putting advancement up the career ladder first. Melinda catches herself thinking about Dylan more than she'd like. Sleep eludes her, and she tosses and turns nervously. Dylan also didn't take the encounter easily. It felt like he was hit hard by something heavy. Possessiveness, selfishness, all flared up when he saw her with that wealthy hunk. He should leave and never cross her path again. She made it clear when they parted. though only a fool wouldn't understand her words. But he wasn't going to back down. Dylan knew Melinda very well. She would get a little upset and then back off. He knew just what to say to strike the deepest chords of her soul. The intriguing student life swept Melinda away, so she rarely thought about her ex-boyfriend. Matthew would drive her home, and they started spending more time together, both enjoying each other's company. Matthew came from a wealthy family of lineage doctors on his mother's side. His great-grandfather was a renowned surgeon who worked wonders. His grandfather and mother, Tamala, were also doctors. He decided to continue the dynasty and followed his heart to this prestigious college. He noticed Melinda right away. Her hair drew his gaze. Thick, heavy, and with a delicious scent. He followed her into the lecture hall, inhaling the delightful fragrance. He just wanted to look at her. It was as if she sensed his desire and abruptly turned around. Taken aback, he froze, causing those behind him to jostle. "Hello," he managed to say. "Hi," the beauty replied, and they worked on together. Matthew amusingly courted her, sometimes with an apple, sometimes with a chocolate bar, all the while quipping that it was brain food. He was part of the wealthy clique formed by freshmen, but he spent more time with Melinda, surprising their peers. "What do you talk to her about? It's obvious she's trying so hard to fit in. Sure, she's a beauty, but her background speaks for itself. Even tastefully chosen clothes can't hide that," remarked one of their classmates. At first, Matthew was furious and defended his girlfriend, but then he decided it wasn't their business how he spent his time. Melinda sensed her classmates' attitudes and felt anxious, but her anxiety would have been much stronger if she knew about the conversation between Matthew and his father. Matthew's father, Michael, worked in oil production. He was well known in the field, and his circle was accordingly influential. So when the driver reported to him that Matthew was dropping off a beautiful student at home every time, his father decided to have a talk with him. Walking into his room, he caught him in the middle of a chat. "Are you texting with Melinda?" Michael inquired, knowing the answer beforehand. Matthew flinched but didn't hide it. "Yes, with her." "Who is she? Who are her parents? Where do they work?" His father pressed on. "Dad, it's not the 19th century, and who her parents are doesn't matter. She's a beautiful and smart girl. Isn't that enough for you?" Matthew retorted. "No, it's not enough. And you know why." "Tell me," his father insisted. "What interests you?" Matthew countered. "Everything. Who are her parents? Where do they work? Where does she live?" Michael demanded. "She doesn't have parents. They died. Her grandmother recently passed away too. Melinda is completely alone. Mrs. O'Brien, whom she met, invited her to live with her, and Melinda rents out her apartment." "Melinda," Matthew started. "No need to continue. I understand everything now. She's after money. Latched onto you when she saw the car. Expensive clothes. What have you already given her?" Michael interrupted. "Dad, can you please stop? She doesn't need my or your money." "Got it. She's embarrassed to even take a chocolate bar," Matthew defended. "Well, that's obvious. She wants something substantial," his father concluded. "I'll handle it myself." "Okay," Matthew asserted, "as long as you're living in my house." His father began. "It's my house too. And if I'm taking up too much space, I can move to the dorm." Matthew interrupted. "Yeah, and you'll be able to live in that dump." His father yelled. "What's all this noise? Can't you talk calmly?" Suddenly, Matthew's mother, Tamala, entered the room. "No, we can't. It's your democratic upbringing. Some loose girl is squeezing money out of him, and as usual, he sees nothing." Michael snapped back. "She's not a loose girl," Matthew retorted. "Shut up," Michael shouted. "Let's not argue. Let's invite your girl over. We'll have tea, chat, and you'll see her in a different setting. Maybe you'll change your opinion about her, and Dad will be proven right." Matthew's mother suggested. Right about what? That she's a loose girl. Matthew's father retorted. On that point, I agree. Your father got overheated. She admitted. So, are you okay with it? She asked Matthew. Okay. When should I invite her? Matthew agreed. This weekend. Invite her for dinner. She instructed, giving her husband a meaningful glance. Otherwise, Dad won't be able to handle it anymore. She added before leaving the room. The Fisher family of hereditary physicians lived in wealth. It was within this family that Tamala, Matthew's mother, was born. Once, she introduced her boyfriend, Michael, to her parents. Externally, nothing remarkable, but his poverty was immediately noticed by her family from his appearance. There was a neatly placed patch on his pants. The shirt was clearly not his size, and the jacket seemed a bit old. He was almost kicked out of Tamala's house then, but he pledged his love to Tamala and promised her parents that he would earn all the money in the world to provide a happy life for his girlfriend and their future children. Tamala remembered this in light of her son's recent conversation with his father. Michael forgot everything about how poor he was and now started accusing the girl of all sins. Not good, Michael. Forgetting the past and not believing in love. My parents trusted you, she thought to herself. Tamala was a little upset about her husband's behavior. Blaming someone for something they are not guilty of is vile. She noticed that Michael had changed. Money, power, environment. They change people, and not always for the better. There were 2 days left until Saturday, and Tamala had already planned the dinner and meeting the girl to talk and calm down. But the meeting never happened. Matthew, what's the point of this meeting? We've known each other for 3 months. We're not getting married. Why this meeting? I won't go, Melinda said. Matthew was deeply offended, but internally agreed with Melinda. Why should we cater to father's wishes? He's just scared for his money. Melinda is not a gold digger, Matthew thought, looking at her. Mrs. O'Brien supported the girl's decision not to attend the meeting. They just wanted to see you, assess you, and if possible, stigmatize you. You did the right thing. Dear, I'm proud of you. But I want to see this Matthew. Bring him to us, she said. But he probably won't come now, Melinda replied. You're a future woman, so you should be a little cunning. Come up with something. Consider it your task. And they both laughed. The school day goes by calmly. Lectures, seminars, exams. The first session was approaching. Melinda was one of the best students. The teachers were pleased with her, and the group she belonged to consisted of kids from middle-class families. But there were more of them than those who considered themselves cool and wealthy. Melinda had no exams to retake, so she went straight home after classes, while Matthew had to take an exam. Can I call you tonight? You have to, Melinda said, laughing, putting on her shoulders the beautiful backpack. A gift from Clark. She leaves the college and sees his car. Her smile shows that she's happy to see him. Hello, Clark. Nice to see you. Nice to see you too. I missed you, so I decided to drop by and see how the student is doing. I miss all of you too. You've done so much good for me. Let's go, have lunch, and talk. Okay. I'll just call Mrs. O'Brien. I called her myself and asked for your release, promising to bring you back safe and sound. She was already getting into his car when Matthew came out of the college. He saw her and quickly dialed her number. The girl didn't answer immediately. Why did it take you so long to pick up? The phone was in my backpack, so it took me a moment to get it. Did you finish everything? Yes, they gave everyone passing grades right away. Oh, that's great. I was studying for 3 days. Where are you now? I'm going to have lunch with Clark. And who is he? Matthew. You know I don't like baseless jealousy. We talked about it too. He's a good family friend. Okay, see you tomorrow. Matthew was very angry with her. How many times had he invited her to lunch at a restaurant? The answer was always the same. No, I don't want to go to restaurants on your father's money. But now she agreed to go with that guy. Matthew got into his Mercedes and his driver took him home. A little later, Matthew decided to drive to Melinda's place and wait for her outside the entrance. They arrived at 6. The man helped Melinda out of the car and escorted her to the entrance. "Thanks for the evening," said Clark. Matthew overheard this. "Thank you too. Feel free to call me sometime, Clark." As soon as the car drove away, Matthew immediately dialed her number. "Melinda, where are you? I'm heading home. Wait for me. We need to talk." After a while, he approached her, looking at her with a hint of mockery, which angered Melinda. "Why did you come here? Aren't you glad to see me?" "Matthew, are you trying to start a fight so that all the neighbors hear? I'm not your wife or even your fiancé. I believe jealousy is for the weak and insecure men. I don't think that's you. It's a horrible feeling, humiliating me." "Got it." He opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, the door opened, and Mrs. O'Brien appeared. "Hello, youngsters. Come on in," she said, letting them into the apartment. They both entered the apartment feeling offended. "Well, come in, Othello," said Mrs. O'Brien, eyeing Matthew from head to toe. "Although you don't quite fit the Othello image. Too young for that." "Was Othello an old man?" "No, he wasn't. Have you read Othello?" "I watched the movie." Matthew grumbled unhappily. "Oh, at your age, you should be reading books." "I'll retire and lie on the couch reading Shakespeare. I've been retired for 10 years already, but I have no desire to lie down at all." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." Melinda stood and listened. She didn't like the tone with which Matthew spoke to Mrs. O'Brien. It seemed to her that he wanted to show, despite his age, that he was superior to her in every way. But when he apologized, she calmed down a bit. "It's hard to offend me, young Manuel. I'm older and wiser than you. I see much more and further than you do. And of course, I don't rely solely on emotions, which can't be said about you. May I speak with Melinda and leave?" "I thought you already talked." "No, I haven't finished saying what I wanted to. You opened the door too early." "No, I opened it just in time. I didn't like your tone when you spoke to Melinda. It was just as rude as it is now. And I ask you to leave, young man." "I'm Matthew. Goodbye," she said, indicating that the conversation was over. Melinda didn't see him off, and in anger, he slammed the door too loudly. The elevator took him away from the apartment where he had just shown himself from not the best side. Leaning against the cabin wall, he pondered. He was furious. No one had ever talked to him like that before. And this old woman humiliated him in front of Melinda. He stopped a taxi and, giving the address, leaned back on the soft seat. "I need to remember the old methods of getting attention," thought Matthew. "I'll give Melinda a break for a week. She'll come to me herself. I didn't notice any other guys lining up for her. And that old weirdo is not even in the game." Everything was boiling inside him. "You don't know me well, girl. A real man stops at nothing. And I will achieve my goal because until today, I always got what I wanted. And anyway, I need to go back to the guys in the group. To my pride." Mrs. O'Brien remained silent after the young man left, contemplating their conversation. "Is he not my guy?" Melinda asked cautiously. "Don't rush, dear. He's certainly got character. He absorbed everything his parents instilled in him, so it's hard to blame him for anything here. But I think he's not lost. I believe we'll settle what we've started with him." In the morning, without having breakfast, Melinda rushed off to her studies. And 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. "It's Matthew," Mrs. O'Brien thought, and went to open the door. There he stood, with dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. Tall, handsome, in perfectly fitting jeans and polished to a shine shoes. "Aren't you surprised?" he asked. "No, I knew you'd come back, so I'm not surprised. Sit down. Let's have breakfast." "No, just coffee. No sugar." "A splendid breakfast," the woman said, placing a cup in front of him. They sit in silence, exchanging rare glances, studying each other. Yesterday's situation still hung over them. The woman looked at his well-groomed hands, cleanly shaved face, and stylish haircut. After finishing his coffee first, Matthew didn't procrastinate and got to the point of why he came. I behaved inappropriately yesterday. I want to apologize for my behavior. I couldn't control myself after seeing Melinda with that man. She didn't rush to answer, but scrutinized the boy's eyes carefully. Why are you looking at me so attentively? He asked. I'm looking and seeing a capricious child who doesn't want to give up a beautiful toy, forgetting that it's not his. I'm not a child. I'm a man. Oh. A man is not someone who counts the number of women he's had in bed. A man is about actions, reliability, independence. Such men, of course, may have many women, but more often, they have one main value: family. That's in an ideal world. Matthew confidently joined the debate. Such men are literary heroes because life teaches to be tough, strong, have willpower, love oneself, and be confident. I wouldn't marry such a man, the woman firmly declared. Maybe today's youth values different things, but a man should always remain exactly as I've described. This topic is interesting, but I have to run to the college. Do you forgive me? We'll see, Mrs. O'Brien replied. Matthew entered the lecture hall only for the third class. Seeing him, Melinda waved her hand, but he didn't look in her direction, immediately taking a seat at an empty spot in the front row. Hi, Matthew, whispered Penelope, the most spirited girl in their group. Her father owned a dental clinic. She drove herself to the college in a brand new Jaguar F-Pace and was very proud of it. Matthew knew that all the parties took place at her mansion outside the city, in the huge 3-story house. Her parents lived in the city all week to avoid traffic jams on their way to work, so the mansion was always free. Penelope did reasonably well in her studies despite all the absences. She whispered something in his ear, wrapping one arm around his neck, and this time, he didn't want to shake her hand off, knowing that Melinda was watching all of this. She struggled to focus on the lecture. Various thoughts raced through her feverish mind. Melinda understood why Matthew had initiated all of this. He decided to show me my place. Well, I'm not against it, especially since I know him perfectly well. I'll play your game of the offended boy, but there's no way back for you, the girl decided, watching this scene staged especially for her. What did she feel at the moment of making such a decision? It was difficult for her to understand, but it wasn't jealousy. Rather, it was surprise that a modern, handsome guy stooped to revenge. Classes ended, and the girl quickly descended from the top of the auditorium. Hi, Matthew, she said as she passed by. Hello, Melinda, he replied hoarsely. All right. Let's play politeness and just be good acquaintances, the girl thought. Not long ago, he was holding her hand, talking about jealousy and even meeting her parents. But today he exuded coldness, indifference, and unwillingness to communicate. She didn't want to dive into this world of hypocrisy, but by convincing herself that this was life, she almost calmed down. Leaving the college, the girl saw Dylan. Oh God. The last thing I need right now is him, the girl thought, and approached him. Hello, dear. You look beautiful as always, he said. I asked you not to call me that. Have you suddenly forgotten something? Melinda, I miss you terribly. I feel awful without you. Can one mistake really ruin our friendship, our good, trusting relationship? Maybe, Dylan. Don't even doubt it. The girl was about to leave, but he pulled out an incredibly beautiful fragrant white rose on a long stem. This is for you. It's frozen, just like you. Let's go to a cafe, have some hot coffee. At that moment, the door opened, and a cheerful group led by Matthew emerged from the college. His dark eyes were fixed on Melinda. She didn't even need to look to know whose heavy gaze was burning into her back. She felt it with her whole body. She wanted to rid herself of this uncomfortable attention. Let's get out of here, Melinda said discontentedly. Why do you need this romantic game? Remember, This rose won't echo in my heart. I still don't want to see you or know you. As soon as they turned the corner and disappeared from Matthew's view, Melinda handed the rose back to Dylan. Don't come here anymore. I crossed you off a long time ago. Your songs about a yearning soul don't affect me anymore. Just go to hell. To calm down. She walked for a long time and only then got on the bus. Approaching her building, she saw Matthew by the entrance. He was looking down. She lowered her gaze, unable to bear the tension of this visual duel. What was that all about today? He asked without taking his eyes off her. I could ask you the same question. I asked first. Fine. You showed disrespect to me today, and I decided to be mutually polite. That's all. Judging by his expression, one could tell the storm raging in Matthew's soul. Don't play a fellow. It doesn't suit you, and I don't like it either. Did you think I would go crazy seeing you with other girls? You're mistaken. To feel jealous, one must love, and I'm currently free from that feeling. And anyway, take your hands off me. It's time for me to go home, she said, pushing him away and quickly entering the entrance. Without waiting for the elevator, she rushed up to her floor. She wanted to share with Mrs. O'Brien and hear her opinion on what had happened. I'm back, Melinda called out from the hallway, but there was no response. She walked into Mrs. O'Brien's room and quietly opened the door, seeing that she was resting. Melinda was excited. She didn't feel like eating, but she gladly drank her favorite bergamot tea. Snow was falling outside, and it was gloomy, just like Melinda's mood. I managed to get attached to him. His calls, works, gentle touches, and words, they all started to evoke a response from me. I couldn't call it love, but I missed him when I didn't see him. She held the teacup, warming her hands around it, memories engulfing her. Matthew knew the city well, so he came up with various entertainments. The tallest observation deck in the city, where he acted as a guide and told stories about the city with such enthusiasm. There was also the planetarium, which left unforgettable impressions. They watched a 4D movie, reclining in chairs, holding hands. And then there was the star room, where the enormity of the galaxy took their breath away. She would never have such interesting dates again. He tried to surprise her, to charm her, to distract her from the mundane. He was a festive person, and these weren't empty words. In those moments, she felt good being around him. She distracted herself from her memories and thought that if she didn't stop tormenting herself with them, she might give in. Mrs. O'Brien quietly entered the kitchen. Do you feel unwell? Melinda asked. Mrs. O'Brien didn't respond, just waved her hand. She's probably tired of me, the girl thought. It's time to move out from here. I'm abusing her hospitality. I need to call the tenants to find themselves another place to live. It's time to live independently, the girl thought sadly and even fearfully. Undoubtedly, she had asked herself this question many times before, but each time she postponed the moment. But apparently, the time had come. She peeked into the landlady's room again. She was sitting with the phone in her hand, constantly dialing numbers. Is something wrong, Mrs. O'Brien? You're not yourself today. If it's because of me, I'll leave soon. It's been half a year, and I've overstayed my welcome, the girl said. Oh, dear, don't you dare do that. It'll be even worse without you. Frank, my son, hasn't called for the past 2 months. I keep calling him, but it's all inaccessible. I feel like something has happened. Nothing like this has ever happened in all these years. I've contacted all our acquaintances, but still nothing, she said, wiping away the tears with a tissue. Melinda hugged this wise, kind woman who had replaced her parents and grandmother for her. It was thanks to her that she was studying at the college and hadn't made any mistakes. A week passed. Then the second week. Matthew tried to avoid Melinda at the college, not approaching her or calling her. He was like a lurking beast, waiting for his prey. But Melinda didn't feel like his prey. She missed their meetings a little, but she held up just fine. At some point, Melinda felt lighter. She didn't even notice when she stopped looking in his direction, observing how girls shamelessly hung around him. She felt released, able to breathe freely. But Matthew decided to make the first move after all. "Babe, I've missed you. Let's go somewhere," he asked. "No, Matthew. I've recovered. I've gotten over you. Today, I bid you farewell," she replied. SHH. What are you talking about? Farewell. Christmas is coming soon," he said. "Yes, and I made a wish. But you're not in it," she said, putting on her backpack and heading to Clark's car. He had come to congratulate her on the upcoming Christmas. Matthew watched her go, feeling a bit sad that the last word wasn't his. Melinda returned home by evening. Mrs. O'Brien seemed gloomy. Still no news from Frank, so Melinda tucked away her good mood. She didn't know how to help this wonderful woman. She was hesitant to tell Clark. It wasn't her secret, although he could have helped. "How are things at the college?" The woman managed to ask. "Don't worry about me. Everything's fine. Exams are coming up." "Still no word from your son?" She shook her head instead of replying and went to her room. "Mrs. O'Brien, let's tell Clark. Maybe he'll have some thoughts on this," Melinda suggested. Tell him, dear. But I don't know how he can help from here, except for showing sympathy," Mrs. O'Brien replied. But Melinda was already dialing his number before Mrs. O'Brien changed her mind. There were many plans for Christmas, but now no one even remembered them. Melinda worried about Mrs. O'Brien, who had literally turned into a bundle of nerves. From the college, she hurried home to not leave her mentor alone for too long. In the end, she decided to take all the exams early to spend all her time with Mrs. O'Brien. Entering the lecture hall, she was calm and strode confidently to her usual seat. Matthew was sitting nearby. "I saved you a seat," he said casually, as if there had been no conversation between them. Melinda felt the student's stares on her and quickly took the offered seat. Today, she hardly listened to the lecture. Taking out her textbooks, she reviewed exam questions. Matthew watched her with curiosity but didn't ask anything. When the lesson was over, he dared to ask her a question. "Do you want to take the exam early?" "I do, but I don't know if it will work out," she replied, not looking up from her textbook. "What's the rush?" he asked interestedly. She didn't go into the details of the reasons, but simply replied, "It's necessary." "You're very capable, Melinda," he said. "You study all the subjects diligently, so everything will be fine." She looked up at him. "Thank you, Matthew, for your support. I could go with you to make it less scary," he offered. "That's unnecessary. I'll manage." She passed the exams easily, answering all the teacher's questions. After that, she walked out and hurried home. On the street, she bumped into Matthew. "I've been waiting for you," he exclaimed. These moments dragged on for so long. "How was the exam?" "Everything's fine. I got an excellent grade. I have to go, Matthew. I need to go home." "Won't you even have a coffee with me?" "Listen, let's not pretend like there wasn't a conversation between us that ended our relationship. And what if I want to have a relationship with you again? Is that bad?" "Well," she raised her eyebrows. "How interesting. I'll tell you this. It's not bad. It's just not necessary. We're too different. You have plenty of girls fawning over you, and you don't seem to mind. Are you jealous, Melinda?" "You're mistaking wishes for reality." "No, I'm not jealous. I suggest you look closer to your league, and your parents will be pleased." "That's it, Matthew. I have to run." "Am I really unpleasant to you?" "Not at all. You're handsome and smell wonderful," she said, touching his ear. "Let's take a walk and talk a little," he said, hugging her. Quickly freeing herself from his embrace, she said, "Next time, I promise. I don't intend to lose you as a friend, but nothing more." At home, Mrs. O'Brien told her that Clark had called. His friend and his wife went to Frank's place, but the house was closed. They called and knocked, but no one answered. Even the neighbors hadn't seen them for a while. "I'm going to Sweden, Mrs. O'Brien said firmly. "And you're coming with me. I need to take all my exams. There's just one left. I'll arrange it tomorrow, and then I'll be free." "Good girl," she said, kissing her on the forehead. "Thank you for calling Clark." It turns out his former business partner lives there with his family, and he quickly fulfilled his request. "I'm glad I could help in some way. Something's not right. Maybe Frank isn't the most attentive son, but his father taught him order, which he never broke even after his death." Melinda didn't try to calm Mrs. O'Brien with cliches. She looked at her with such compassion in her eyes that they spoke more than words. After Melinda's words about girls hovering around Matthew and him not minding, he had to admit to himself that he always liked women's attention. It was flattering and boosted his ego. At first, he enjoyed it, even found it amusing. What wouldn't these silly girls do to snag a rich guy? Despite his youth, he had many different women. Like him, they wanted closeness without commitment. It suited him fine. He paid for pleasure with his father's money and promptly forgot about them. Sometimes the price was steep, but he spared no expense for beauty. However, when he met Melinda, all these loose and brazen advances disgusted him and, eventually, grew tiresome. With her arrival, he realized that there were other girls, but he had clearly overdone it with the testing. She was right to tell him, "It's too late, Matthew. I'm over you." They were truly polar opposites, and nothing good would have come out of their relationship, even though he still liked her. Perhaps she was the only girl he hadn't managed to charm into bed. It was more of an exception to the rule. But that's life. If Matthew found himself reminiscing about Melinda at every opportunity, then Melinda had no time for reminiscences. She feared for Mrs. O'Brien and protected her as best she could. Today, an ambulance came for Mrs. O'Brien. By evening, she managed to get up and even eat a little. In this sad, homey robe-clad woman, it was hard to recognize the Mrs. O'Brien that Melinda was used to seeing. After making sure Mrs. O'Brien had fallen asleep, Melinda went to her room. Only now did she realize how tired she was. Drifting off to sleep, she faintly heard someone persistently ringing the doorbell, but she couldn't open her eyes. The ringing didn't stop, so she put on her robe and went to the hallway. "Who's there?" she asked quietly. "I'm here for Mrs. O'Brien," came the reply. "It's too late. Mrs. O'Brien is sleeping. Open up. I'm her son, Frank." Frank, looking through the peephole, she indeed saw Frank, albeit with a beard. With trembling hands, she opened the door and, overjoyed that Mrs. O'Brien's son was alive and well, she threw her arms around him. "Thank God you're okay. We were so worried about you. Now we don't have to fly to Sweden." Closing the door behind their guest, she went to make up a bid for him, while Frank headed to the bathroom to take a shower. "Melinda, what's all that noise?" She heard Mrs. O'Brien's voice. "How are you feeling? How's your heart?" Melinda asked. "I'm fine now." "Well then, I have some amazing news for you, but don't jump up too quickly. The doctor said you shouldn't. Remember that. Frank has flown in from Sweden. He's doing well." She wanted to ask if she was joking, but then she saw her son entering the room. "Mom, don't cry. I'm alive." "Where are the kids? Where's Amelia?" "We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm really tired from the journey. Everything will be tomorrow." She couldn't take her eyes off him. "Why the beard?" "It ages you," she said. "I'll shave it off tomorrow. Good night." Looking at Mrs. O'Brien, you could tell that this woman was coming back to life. Getting up earlier than everyone else the next morning, Melinda prepared breakfast, had her coffee, and decided to leave for the college earlier to not interfere with the conversation between mother and son. "Why did you wake up so early?" Mrs. O'Brien asked. "You could have slept peacefully for another hour." "I don't want to disturb you and Frank. You haven't seen each other for so long," Melinda replied. "Darling, I have no secrets from you. Go to your college. Take your exams early. And come back. We'll go somewhere together in the evening. I feel awkward. Stop it. I'm waiting for you. I adore you," Melinda said, embracing the woman. Frank overheard the conversation between his mother and Melinda and waited for the girl to leave for the college so he could finally talk to his mother. He didn't know where to start this difficult conversation, but delaying it was pointless. Returning home was somewhat of a relief for him. The 2+ months spent in the hospital in Sweden were so dreadful that his nerves were shot, not to mention the shock of the tragedy that happened to his children and wife. He had given his all to the family, but Amelia had destroyed everything that was dear to him. Before going to the kitchen to see his mother, he took a shower. He entered the kitchen half an hour later, now without his beard, with water droplets trickling from his hair. "You look so handsome, Mrs. O'Brien said lovingly as she looked at him. "Mom, I'm handsome because I'm your son." "That's not true. I'm entirely objective. It's just another side of love." Frank felt that his mother was waiting for his story, and he hesitated to start. Taking a final sip of coffee, he took a deep breath and began. "Sometimes it's so hard to understand people's motives," he said sadly. "At 19, I met Amelia. She was 5 years older than me, a petite woman who looked younger than her age. I got attached to her. She was my first woman, an experienced woman who didn't give me a chance to reconsider. I didn't need anyone else, and it seemed mutual. She was into graphic design. A month later, I found out Amelia was pregnant. I didn't know whether to be happy or not, but she immediately said she wouldn't get rid of the baby, and we got married. By that time, I had finished my year-long courses and found a decent job. When we got married, naturally, we spent more time together. I didn't like everything about this woman. While pregnant, she allowed herself to smoke and occasionally have brandy. When this led to arguments, I realized that the key to family happiness isn't trying to change someone, but accepting them as they are, with all their strengths and weaknesses. Finding compromises. It was very difficult, but gradually our relationship improved. She didn't like it when I asked her when she'd come back or where she was going. I understood that at 25, she didn't start a fresh slate with me. She had a past, like everyone. But I knew nothing about her past and felt I had no right to ask about it, let alone be jealous. We had Lucas, a handsome boy. I was happy, and a year later, Olivia was born. I matured immediately, took on more orders. Youth didn't give me the right to leave the family without means. You see, Mom, she was my wife, but often forgot about it. I earned decently, but Amelia spent the money poorly. I preferred to live more modestly, but she had a different opinion on that. You should learn not to save but to earn, my wife reproached me. Or should I find a sponsor? I was a young professional, and expensive projects weren't always entrusted to me. But I tried, and she couldn't overlook that. I know your father was sending you money secretly. Silly man. As if I would be against it, Mother said. Yes, but I didn't give them to my wife. I bought gifts for the children, and Amelia with them. Everyone was happy, and I mentally thanked my father for such help. Not everything was going well for us. After living with Amelia for 7 years, I felt she had cooled towards me, and I was a bit tired of her. Our house turned into a smoking room, and bottles of rum or brandy could be found in corners. This led to serious arguments between us, so severe that one day she suggested divorce. What about the children? I asked then. And what about them? They'll live with me, Amelia replied. You can visit us. I won't interfere with their communication with you. Lucas heard all this and said he'd stay with me, and Olivia did everything her brother did. So the children sided with me, and our marriage, which became hateful to both of us, lasted another 2 years. Frank, why didn't you say anything? His mother asked. Why? What could you have done for me? Just worried. That's all. You know, I've always remembered the words my father once told me. Son, You're a future man and should be able to be responsible for your actions and decisions. If you think they're right, learn to take responsibility for everything you do. And it doesn't matter how old you are. If you don't learn this, even at 50, you won't be a man. This is my answer as to why I didn't say anything about the family troubles. I understand, said the mother. You were already a man in your 20s. I wanted to be, but the lack of life experience sometimes hindered that. I tried my best. 2 more years passed. They were horrible. Amelia got fired from her job for a drunken brawl she caused in the office. Now she wasn't working, but it was also hard to catch her at home. I suspected she was with another man, and we hadn't shared a bed in a long time. I wanted a divorce. Amelia, I'm filing for divorce. It's about time. We've wasted 2 years. She replied angrily. What about the children? I asked again. I won't tell you anything new. They'll stay with me. Maybe you'll leave Lucas with me. After all, he's a boy. He should have his father in his life, and he will have his father. Lucas's father is David, not you. I was already seeing you when I was pregnant. She replied calmly, not feeling guilty. So go to hell and give me the divorce. I was already afraid to ask about my daughter. It's as if she sensed it. Olivia is your daughter. Well, thanks for that, I replied at the time. As I was leaving for work, I asked her not to rush and wait until the evening to settle everything. She agreed, and I left calmly. But halfway there, I realized I forgot a folder with documents. I had to turn back and see such a scene. Amelia was packing things in the trunk, and the crying children were in the car. When she saw me, she quickly got behind the wheel and hit the gas. I turned around and wanted to follow her, but I thought that if she was fleeing from me, she might lose control and something could happen to the children. So I stopped, and in the evening, I got a call from the police station saying that my intoxicated wife had collided with a minibus on the opposite lane. Lucas died instantly. The impact was on his side. My wife was in a coma, and my daughter was alive but with a severe head injury and fractures. Amelia died a week later, and my little girl fought for her life for 2 months. Doctors were amazed at how much thirst for life there was in this little body. I was by her side all this time. I did everything the doctor said. You know, she woke up, opened her beautiful eyes, and whispered something. I leaned in and understood she was saying she loved me. And in the morning, she was gone. I thought I would lose my mind. They gave me some injections. I would drift off, then wake up. But when I came to, I took care of the funerals. He became so engrossed in his story that he didn't notice his mother clutching her chest and gesturing toward the nightstand. Quickly getting up, he handed her the medicine and a glass of water. It was at least half an hour before Mrs. O'Brien asked her son to continue. I should have found Lucas's father. He had the right to know what happened to his child and Amelia. But I didn't. After burying them all in one grave, I came back to a huge empty house, and it only got worse for me. I immediately put the house up for sale. As soon as I got the money, I took a 6-month leave and flew home, despite disapproving looks from my superiors. My body is home, but my soul and heart were in Sweden. He cried. I don't know how to live, and I don't even want to. There's nothing and no one left. 10 years in Sweden wasted. My girl is gone, and I loved Lucas like my own. He was a wonderful boy, smart, and my beautiful princess. He trailed off and opened the bar. But where's the vodka? That won't help, son. Once the hangover kicks in, it'll only get worse, and it'll be hard to get out of it. Be a man to the end. Cry. There's nothing shameful about it. You just have a noble heart and a bleeding soul. He went to his room and didn't come out until evening. No one bothered him, understanding and sympathizing with his sorrow. After Frank left, Mrs. O'Brien couldn't get up from her chair. It was already dark outside, and Melinda was still not home. That naughty girl. Still not back. Where could she be? The woman fought and dialed her number. "Hello." The girl answered immediately. "How are you feeling?" "How's Frank?" "We're fine." "Why aren't you home yet?" "I'm out with Matthew." "With Matthew? Have you decided to start over with him?" "No. But I don't want to lose him as a friend." "I see. Well, come home. We're not going anywhere tonight." Frank's story turned out too tragic. "Okay, I'll be there soon," she said, turning to Matthew. "Take me home, please." "Let's go," he replied. Entering the apartment, Melinda saw her mother and brother sitting in the kitchen. They were drinking tea. The table was beautifully set. In the middle of the table stood a large cake on a tall vase, strawberry jam, and her favorite bergamot tea. "Here's Melinda. Sit down and pour yourself some tea," Mrs. O'Brien said. "Let's get acquainted," Frank said friendly. "I'm Melinda. Thanks to your mom, I live in this wonderful apartment." "I'm Frank. Sorry for scaring you last night. What time do you have to be at the college tomorrow?" he asked. "I've already finished everything early, so I'm just relaxing. But I won't disturb you. My tenants are going away for a week, so I'll stay in my apartment," she said, turning to Mrs. O'Brien. "And please don't argue, but then you'll come back to me. We'll see. Don't be upset. I've already stayed with you for too long. It's my fault that you're leaving. But I'll be leaving soon too. I need to get back to work and buy myself a small apartment to live in," Frank said. The next day, Melinda woke up late. When she came out of her room, there was no one in the house. After breakfast and grabbing a few things, she headed to her apartment. She hadn't been here for a year. Everything felt unfamiliar compared to Mrs. O'Brien's apartment. She didn't know what to do or where to sit. And for the first time, she regretted leaving the apartment where it was so cozy, familiar, and peaceful. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. "Darling, did you run away from us?" Mrs. O'Brien's voice came through. "No, of course not. But I'm at my own place now. I have to get used to living alone and rely only on myself. And don't even think about it. I'm expecting you in a week. You're still my sitter. Remember?" "No, I haven't forgotten," Melinda replied with a smile. Finally, she sat in her grandmother's favorite chair, and memories flooded her. But not for long. Her phone rang again. "Hey, Melinda." She recognized Matthew's voice. "Are you not coming to the college today?" "Nope. I'm not coming. I'm already on vacation. Maybe we can go somewhere." "Matthew, just as friends." "Come on. I don't want to go anywhere. I came to my apartment for a week, just sitting here and reminiscing about what happened a year ago. Can I come over?" "Matthew, I'm going to the store right now. I need to buy groceries." "Don't go anywhere. I'll come myself and bring everything." "Matthew," she said, but he had already hung up. He arrived by taxi an hour later with bags full of groceries. Before she could close the door behind him, a pizza delivery guy arrived. "Let's unpack the groceries, and I'll handle the pizza. Let's have lunch." She smiled at his mood, but went to do as he said. Matthew left around 11 p.m. He had an exam and test to take the next day. They parted ways like the closest of friends. Maybe I'm wrong to refuse Matthew's offer to give him another chance. After all, we had a lot of good moments. Matthew is cheerful, generous, though he lives off his father's money. Still, he treats me wonderfully. Maybe I should give him that chance. The next day, when Matthew called her, she was out working with Frank and Mrs. O'Brien. She had to decline Matthew's invitation, but she learned that he had passed his exam and test. "Well done, Matthew. Congratulations," she said. "I wish you had worked with me," he said sadly. "There will be time. Don't worry," she said, and hung up. "Are suitors pestering you?" Frank asked Melinda. "No, not at all. He's just a friend from college. For some reason, I don't really believe in friendship between men and women, because one of them always hopes for more," Frank remarked. "And that's Matthew," Mrs. O'Brien added. Frank's soul gradually warmed up at home. Mrs. O'Brien helped him like a mother and a psychologist. Whenever he had doubts, his mother had convincing arguments against which he had nothing to say. Whenever he started talking about the kids, he would have a breakdown. That's when both the mother and the psychologist stepped in. He would quiet down, nod, and agree. And so the days passed, and Frank even began to smile, piecing himself together. He hadn't thought it would be this difficult, but he managed. The man was coming back to life, although he would never be the same as before. One night, as Mrs. O'Brien went to get some water, she noticed a strip of light under her son's room door. It was well past midnight, and Frank was still awake. Knocking and not hearing the usual come in, she pushed the door open slightly. Her son was looking at a small photo album. "Will you show me?" she asked. Of course, it seemed to her that he was even happy to share something so dear to him. The photos were of children. "Beautiful Lucas," she said. "Yes, a wonderful boy. Such a smart kid. Frank, he looks like you." "Oh, no, Mom. You think so? You should do a DNA test." "I did, Mom. Now I'm ashamed that I wanted to separate the children into biological and non-biological. But I didn't wait for the results. They should be ready in 3 days. I don't know if they send such documents online. It's medical confidentiality. I think if you ask, they'll email you the results." "Maybe you're right. I'll find out and start getting ready to go to Sweden. Work will distract me, and it's time to visit the cemetery." "Frank, you should take a closer look at Melinda. She's a wonderful girl. Honest, smart, beautiful, capable of anything. Her fate has been tough too. Yeah, she's a good girl, but she's just a child to me. 10 years difference. Mom, that's a lot." "Well, take a closer look. I'm not telling you to marry her, okay? I have a few more days to think about it." After the conversation with Frank about fatherhood, Mrs. O'Brien was sure that Lucas was Frank's son. Amelia deliberately mentioned another man to make her husband let go of her sooner. She wanted to humiliate him, hurt him, show him how insignificant he was. But in reality, the boy was Frank's biological son. She was certain that this would make his heart ache even more. But it was something he had to go through, and he would make it. 3 days passed. In the email that came to his address, it was clearly stated the degree of relationship was confirmed to be 99.9999%. His trembling fingers slid across the keyboard as he read the document stating that Lucas was his son. His son. Frank couldn't understand why his wife did this. "My boy. Lord, what did the child do wrong to you? Lord, what a fool I am." He thought that the most difficult thing to endure was the death of his children. But betrayal, the lie of someone he had lived with for so many years, was also very hard to bear. He sat at the computer, unable to stand up or speak. Footsteps were heard behind him. It was his mother. "Lucas, my boy." He exhaled his name in a hoarse voice. "Mom, why did she do this? Did she hate me so much?" She wanted to get rid of the source of pain, of troubles, as she thought. But a woman who doesn't know who the father of her child is isn't worth your tears and worries. You know the truth. Your children are yours, and your love was mutual. You can't deceive children. They feel falsehood and lies with their innocent souls, and you love them sincerely. Will this pain of loss ever subside? Or is it for a lifetime? He asked himself, and he already knew the answer. It was for a lifetime. "Son, maybe you and Melinda could go for a walk or to the movies," Mrs. O'Brien suggested. "No, Mom, not now and not tomorrow. Maybe next time I come. I'll book a ticket for the nearest days." There was a knock on the door, and when Mrs. O'Brien opened it, she saw Melinda. "Sorry if I'm interrupting, but my tenants arrived, and I had to vacate the apartment," she said. "I'm glad to see you again. Frank is leaving for Sweden tomorrow, so it'll be just you and me again," Mrs. O'Brien replied. Leaving the apartment, Her son promised to visit often, which Mrs. O'Brien was immensely glad to hear. But Frank didn't come the next year or even the year after, citing his heavy workload as an excuse. He bought a small apartment near the office and walked to work. His colleagues noted that he became withdrawn, uncommunicative. Knowing about his tragedy, they didn't intrude, allowing him to come to terms with things. He had long forgotten how to socialize and date until a girl who had just joined their office approached him. She was his age, serious. To get his attention, she deliberately came to his office to inquire about documents he was supposed to bring in the morning. "You didn't bring the documents, and I can't move forward without them," the girl, Betty, simply stated. "I'm Betty, and I know your name is Frank." "Sorry, Betty. Here are the documents. They've been ready for a while," Frank said. That evening, Frank walked her home. She seemed to expect something more, but he wasn't ready to show any further signs of affection. She couldn't be called beautiful, more like cute. But there was something off with Frank. He compared her to Amelia, and to his own regret, Betty didn't come out on top. He answered her questions monosyllabically, asked his own, and kept glancing at the time, although he knew it wasn't quite proper. Betty paid no attention to this. Knowing about his family tragedy, she had never been married, but she had experience with men and could distinguish between a reliable and decent man and a womanizer or thrill seeker. In Frank, she saw a deeply suffering person, decent, and, importantly, handsome. Taking things slowly, without pressuring him, she managed to get Frank to court her. Mrs. O'Brien's son sent her photos with Betty, and she liked her. This was precisely the woman who could help heal his emotional wounds and become the life companion that a mother dreamed of for her son. Within a year, they moved in together, and another year later, Frank proposed to her. They decided not to have a lavish wedding. Mrs. O'Brien was happy for her son. "This time, everything will be fine for him," the woman reassured herself. She really wanted to see her son happy. Time passed, and Melinda continued to live with Mrs. O'Brien while attending college. Recently, she had started working at the clinic as a nurse's assistant. Both in spirit and character, she was persistent, overcoming obstacles confidently on her path. With Matthew, they only saw each other at the college. She had no more time for him. He had long realized that nothing serious would happen between him and Melinda, and he had made peace with that. Soon, he started being seen with an older girl from their course. Yesterday was a tough day for Melinda. After college, she went to work as usual. Seeing several ambulances at the main entrance, she knew there would be many patients. And indeed, there was a car accident. All operating rooms were prepared, and all surgeons were called in to save people's lives. When the flow of casualties ended, and the operating rooms were cleaned up, they could finally catch their breath. "Are you tired?" asked a young nurse. "I'm very nervous. So many casualties," Melinda replied. "They say a young man caused the accident. He felt unwell while driving and lost control. He was the most severely injured. It's still unknown if he'll survive. That's our job, Melinda. Seeing death every day. Some get used to it, but I've been working here for 3 years, and I still look at it as if it's the first time. I don't think I'll ever get used to it either," Melinda replied sadly. At home, Mrs. O'Brien was waiting for her. "Sit down, have dinner, and let's have some tea," she said. "No, I don't want to. I'm tired today," Melinda replied. "Did you hear about the big accident? Clark was involved in it. Mrs. Thomas told me," Mrs. O'Brien said. "Mrs. Thomas?" Melinda asked. "Yes. She started cleaning for him again, so she knows all the news about him. We brought in many casualties today. Tomorrow I'll find out if Clark is among them." All night, Melinda couldn't stop thinking about Clark. Instead of going to the college the next morning, she went to the clinic to inquire about the injured Clark Falcon. Clark wasn't in her clinic. It wasn't difficult to find out where the accident victims had been taken. She found him and immediately went to that clinic to inquire about his condition. On the way there, she remembered how she had met him, how he had supported her when her grandmother got sick. He had always been there for her, and now it was her turn. Matthew called. "Are you okay? You didn't come to the college today for the first time, and I was worried," he said. "Thank you, Matthew. I'm fine. I'll be at the college tomorrow," Melinda replied. "Well, okay. I'm glad you're okay," he said. She was pleased with his concern. Clark was in the intensive care unit, and, of course, she couldn't see him. But she spoke to the doctor who operated on him. "Hello, doctor. I would like to know about Clark Falcon's condition," she said. "Who are you to him?" The doctor asked. "I'm his niece," she replied. "I see. Despite all his injuries, he was lucky that the collision wasn't head-on, but rather on the side of the driver. He was slightly trapped by the door, so his leg was injured. Ribs were broken, and he sustained a head injury. The operation was successful. If everything goes according to plan, he'll be transferred to a regular ward in a couple of days. That's all for now. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. Does he need any care?" "No. We have enough staff." "Do you have all the necessary medications?" "Yes. Everything's in order with that," he said. Then, after a moment's thought, he added, "Although, as soon as he's transferred to the ward, he'll need this medication." He handing her a prescription. "These are injections. We've run out, but we've ordered them, although they won't arrive until next week. Can you buy them?" "Of course. They're quite expensive, and he needs at least 8 of them." "I'll bring 10. That would be great." When the first 2 pharmacies told her that the medicine wasn't available, she wasn't too upset. But when she heard the same answer in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th pharmacies, she became flustered. "Who can I turn to for help?" the girl thought. Matthew came to mind. His parents had significant connections. He could help. So, she confidently dialed his number. "Matthew, are you available to talk?" she asked. "I'll be right there," Matthew said to someone else. Melinda understood that he was alone. "Are you busy?" she inquired. "No. Go ahead. What do you need?" he replied. "Matthew, I need to find a medicine for a good person. I've checked pharmacies, and it's nowhere to be found. Can you help?" "Who needs the medicine?" he asked. "Does it matter?" She countered. "Yes, it does," he insisted. "It's for a man," Melinda replied. "For your man?" he questioned. After that question, she immediately lost the desire to ask for help and, thanking him, said she didn't need anything anymore before hanging up. He called her back several times, but she didn't answer. "And after all of this, he says he loves me," Melinda reasoned. Since he realized that Melinda wasn't serious about dating him, he was torn between hurt, jealousy, the desire to put her in her place, make her regret the failed relationship, and admiration for her determination and seriousness. His wounded pride and longing for her kept gnawing at him. Sitting at home on his balcony, he gazed at the moon, feeling like howling because he missed her. Matthew admired her intellect and determination, but Melinda knew nothing of this. She made a decision, promising herself to see Matthew only as a friend and nothing more. She wanted Matthew to respect her decision as much as she did. Melinda remembered Mrs. Gregg and her acquaintance, Dr. Preston, and immediately called her. Mrs. Gregg readily agreed to help. "Melinda, write down the address of the pharmacy warehouse. Tell them it's from Preston, and they'll give you everything. I knew you would help." "Thank you. Good luck, dear." She returned home late with the coveted package. Melinda was happy that she could help Clark in some way. The next day, Melinda took the medicine to the hospital. "You're quick," praised the doctor. "Everyone should have such beautiful and loving nieces." In the morning, Melinda hurried to the metro. Today she had to be on time for her lectures and not be late. "Oh, Melinda, hi." The girls greeted her. You've started skipping classes. My reputation is so impeccable that it's time to tarnish it a little." Melinda laughed. Suddenly, a voice behind her spoke up. "We need to talk." Melinda turned her head towards the speaker. It was Matthew. "Not now. I'm talking to the girls." "No, right now. We need to talk about a lot of things," said Matthew, taking Melinda's elbow. She pulled her arm away and raised her voice. "I understand, Matthew, that you're not used to being rejected. But who am I compared to you? But you must remember once and for all that the world doesn't revolve around you. Understand? And no one is obliged to jump around you and run at your first demand. Do I make myself clear? Right now, I'm talking to my friends. Are you getting a bit too full of yourself?" Matthew asked, surprised. "Just right. I've realized that it's the only way with you," she said, turning away from him. She knew she had bruised his pride. "I understand," said the guy. Both of their moods were terrible, but neither showed their sour disposition. Matthew sat with his friend Penelope, and she immediately leaned towards him. "What? Did you have another fight with her?" "She's not her. Her name is Melinda." "Ah. Well, I still advise you to apologize to her." "What? Apologize?" said the girl. "Or do I have to spell it out for you?" He had never really apologized to anyone before. If one of the girls got upset, he could give them something. But apologize? Matthew just didn't understand what he was supposed to apologize for. "Matthew, do you really like her?" Penelope asked. "Now I'm not sure. She's become very tough." "Well, that's not bad. Why would you want a crybaby?" A week passed before Clark was moved from the intensive care unit to a regular hospital room. On the first day in his new room, Melinda came to visit. Everyone already knew she was his niece and nodded sympathetically, understanding the difficult situation she was in. His condition was stable. He was regaining consciousness, but it would take time before he returned to his old self. When he saw Melinda, he was surprised. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "You're not supposed to talk," Melinda replied, placing a finger to her lips. "I just came to visit, to pass on greetings from everyone who knows you. We all feel sorry and will pray for your recovery." "Thank you. I'm glad you haven't forgotten about me." "How could I? You've done so much good for me." At that moment, a nurse entered and said that the patient was about to undergo procedures and injections. Melinda took Clark's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze, silently reassuring him that everything would be okay. "I'll come back," she said. "I'll be waiting," Clark replied. A frightening thought flashed through his battered mind. "I'm lucky to have been in the accident. Now I'll get to see Melinda every day." He smiled. During the days when Melinda wasn't working, she visited Clark. With each passing day, he improved, and they could talk for a long time. Now that he had miraculously survived, everything he had strived for and lived for seemed so trivial and insignificant. Before, he was always running somewhere, making decisions, buying an apartment, a car, realizing that he needed to get married. He met attractive women, but most of them just wanted to marry him for his money and vacation on the ocean. He had never been greedy, and all that could be his wife's if he saw in her eyes the spark that could ignite a family hearth, where their children could run around. But he hadn't met anyone like that, and Melinda was so young. Still, he didn't give up his dream of being with her. The only thing that bothered him was that she treated him like a good person and nothing more. She thanked him for his help, but didn't give him any hope for a continued relationship. Lately, they hadn't seen each other at all. And now, with this stroke of luck like the accident, Clark felt like the luckiest man alive, even with broken ribs and a head injury. He would try to explain to her, as long as she would listen. "I mustn't miss this chance. It's given to me from above," he thought. Clark was allowed to get up to start working on his injured leg. He and Melinda agreed that she would help him stand up and work with him down the corridor, essentially teaching him to work and take his first steps. She hurried to him, but still arrived late, delayed at the college. Approaching his room, she saw a young nurse, supporting him by the waist, slowly walking with him down the corridor. He embraced her shoulders, trying to place his injured leg correctly, and they rejoiced in these successes, laughing together. Clearly, they enjoyed each other's company. Thank goodness. Clark is starting to recover, Melinda thought, stopping in her tracks, not wanting to disturb the pair. The nurse spotted her first and, seating Clark in a chair, said something to him. He nodded and leaned back in the chair. He was clearly tired. Melinda stood at the corner, unsure of what to do. "Why did you come again?" Nurse Vicky asked her, her face stony. "Don't come to him anymore. He's mine. I know he has no relatives, especially nieces. I'll tell everyone, and they'll stop letting you see him. But he's waiting for me," Melinda replied. "It's not a problem. Call him and say you're busy." "Why should I listen to you?" Melinda pushed her aside and headed toward Clark. "You won't go there. Understand? You're young, beautiful. Why do you need this grown man? But I like him, and he likes me too. Don't interfere. If you're not around, we'll make it work." Melinda didn't know what to do. She looked from the nurse to Clark, who was searching for Vicky with his eyes. "Fine. Here, give him this book." He asked for it. "Tell him I couldn't. I know what to say. Thank you. You'll find your person. And Clark will be with me," Vicky said, looking at him with love. Vicky was happier than ever, spending time with Clark. They talked a lot about nature, fishing. She tried not to touch on topics that would remind him of Melinda and the misfortune that had befallen him. She thought he would never remember that girl. But he did, precisely at the moment when Vicky took his hand and was about to tell him about her feelings. "Give me my phone. I'll call Melinda. She promised to come today, but she didn't come and didn't even call." "It's not like her," Clark said. "She came, brought you this book, but she was in a hurry. Something urgent at the college." Vicky leaped. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" "I forgot. Maybe she won't be allowed here anymore. She's not your niece. You said yourself you have no relatives." "What niece?" Clark asked, surprised. "She fooled the doctor to come to you and called herself your niece. Didn't you know?" "No, she didn't tell me." He tried her phone number many times, but the subscriber was unavailable. "Are you upset?" Vicky asked sorrowfully. "Yes, I was waiting for her. A lot," Clark admitted. "And are you waiting for me? Do you want to see me?" "What's with all these questions? I don't understand." "I really like you, Clark. We have a lot in common. We suit each other. Why don't we try living together? Maybe our relationship would mature into marriage, and we could become a strong family in the future. I think we could have beautiful children." "You have long-term plans?" Clark exclaimed in surprise. "So what? I'm 30, with a failed marriage behind me. I work 2 shifts. But when I remember that I'm a woman, of course, I want a family, children, and a husband like you," she replied. He couldn't even imagine a woman being so candid. And only after her passionate speech did he look at her differently. "But this is a very serious step. Family, children. They should grow up seeing loving parents. And I can't promise you that yet," he said. "You don't have to promise yet. Once you get to know me better, I'm sure you'll love me. I'm a good homemaker, skilled with my hands, love children, and you. And I'm beautiful," she reassured. He smiled at her and for a moment pictured the time when she would marry him, and he, coming home from work, would see his children clinging to her skirt, then running to him with cries of "Daddy." Vicky, too, looked at him as if he were a dream. Despite her confessions, he remained just as distant and unapproachable, even as she sat beside him and spoke with him. Only now did he know that she loved him. Vicky went to other patients, mechanically performing her difficult job, but also never forgetting to check in on her most beloved patient. As she was about to leave for home, she decided to stop by to say goodbye but paused at the door. "Melinda, I finally managed to reach you. Thanks for the book. How are you?" Clark asked over the phone. "I'm good. There's a lot going on at the college. More subjects added. And you know, I still have to work, Melinda replied. You mean you won't have time to visit me anymore? No. Why? She felt uncomfortable that he had caught on so quickly to what she wanted to say. I can come on Sundays when I don't have classes or work. Something else seems to have happened. Everything changed so abruptly. Maybe I did or said something wrong. Clark. She hesitated for a moment, debating whether to tell him about Vicky. Clark. She repeated his name. Vicky likes you, and my presence only interferes with your relationship. She sensed trouble brewing on the other end of the line. Clark. Don't be silent. You're scaring me. Did Vicky tell you that? No. I figured it out myself. Watching you. You suit each other. It's obvious. She's beautiful, but I don't love her. It's a matter of time. She's assertive, experienced. She can offer you a lot. Her intelligence, attractiveness, desire to be with you. But love will come. You've become quite mature. Come on Sunday. Okay, I'll try. Vicky stood, leaning against the door, hesitating to go into Clark. Not now, she thought, and headed for the exit. It was well past midnight, and Clark lay there, pondering that nobody should grow old alone. He was already over 30, with neither children nor a family. It was all work. Up at 6, breakfast, and the entire day at work. It didn't matter if it was Saturday or Sunday. There were years when he didn't even take vacations. Did he feel lonely? No. He always enjoyed what he was doing. Apparently, he was destined to be alone. Do people get married just because it's expected or to avoid being alone in old age? He didn't think so. Even at 32, he still believed in love, intimacy, and soul connections. To have someone to share joy with, to pamper, love, rush home to, and surprise with little gifts. That's how he envisioned family life. And what was even stranger, he only saw his other half in Melinda. He didn't consider anyone else beside her, although he felt she harbored no feelings for him other than gratitude. He was preparing his speech for Sunday to close this chapter named Melinda Forever. He would look her in the eye and say, "You're the most charming woman I've ever met. I've told you that you are beautiful. And those are not just words. In my 32 years, I've seen many women, but I've never proposed to any of them because I didn't love them. But with you, I'd marry you right now if you agree. I know we would be happy and live a long life. I'm sure of it." Sunday arrived. He waited, and every creak of the door made him tense. And finally, sunlight flooded the room. The girl walked in with a smile on her face and hugged Clark. "Hello, sorry I don't come often. And you're doing great. You look great without the bandage," she said, sitting on the chair opposite him. "How are you? Tell me." "Melinda, I wanted to talk about us. This will be the last conversation, after which I'll never bring it up again, depending on your answer." "Clark, I'm not going to get married. We've already talked, and it's hard to wish for a better friend than you," she replied. "You don't even want to hear me out. I'm afraid my answer might hurt you." "I really wouldn't want that. I understand. There will be no more talks, and you don't need to come to see me anymore. Okay, I'm already feeling fine. Your visits just give me false hope. I don't want to deceive myself." Throughout the rest of the time, they talked about Melinda's studies, her work, and Clark's health. She stayed with him for at least 3 hours. Before leaving, they hugged tightly, not letting go until there was a knock on the door. "Oh," said Vicky. "The niece came to visit. I'm already leaving." "Get well," Melinda said. "Can I call you?" Clark asked. "Of course, I'll be glad to hear your voice," she said, and the hospital room door closed. A month later, Clark was discharged, and Vicky escorted him. "Call me, Clark. I'll be waiting. And remember everything I told you," Vicky said. He nodded and got into his friend's car, finally heading home, which he had missed dearly. Melinda finished her second year, and Mrs. O'Brien persuaded her to take a 2-week vacation and go to the seaside. "No, I'd rather work," Melinda said. "What about me? You're my companion, and you should follow me everywhere, Mrs. O'Brien insisted. You don't need a companion. You're smart, beautiful, and you can go and relax on your own, Melinda replied. Well, seriously, I'm almost 70, and I'm a bit scared to go alone. All right. Let's go together. For the first time in her 20 years, she swam in the sea. It turned out that the sea in dreams and reality were completely different things. She was amazed by the vastness of the sea and the white seagulls. The summer flew by quickly. After the summer session, 2 people were missing from the group. Matthew passed the session very well. Melinda was glad to see him. They greeted each other, said goodbye, but nothing more. She saw him with different girls, but just smiled in response. It didn't bother her at all. When it was time for specialization, Melinda's desire to become a pediatrician was supported by Mrs. O'Brien. Matthew decided to become a surgeon. Melinda had been working for a whole year, and those who wanted to become surgeons were in residency. Thanks to Mrs. O'Brien's connections, Melinda worked as a children's doctor in a private clinic and was happy. The children adored her, the mothers trusted her, and the fathers admired her. The clinic where Melinda worked was multi-profiled. The children's department was located on the first floor of the 6-story Avicenna Medical Center. Above were the surgical department, followed by women's health, men's health, and the administrative building. Several times, Mrs. O'Brien came to this center to see her protégé. Peeking through the slightly open door, she looked at the grown-up, serious Melinda and rejoiced in her success. What a beauty she is, the woman thought. The girl possessed natural beauty that didn't need to be emphasized, and people liked it, especially men. The doctor's outfit suited her well. Upon Mrs. O'Brien's advice, Melinda read a lot. She found articles about art and tried to stay up to date with all the latest trends. They enjoyed visiting exhibitions and then sharing their impressions. Mrs. O'Brien liked Melinda's reasoning. She had her own opinion, which didn't always coincide with hers. Melinda had no girlfriends. Mrs. O'Brien replaced them. But she also said that it was wrong. Girlfriends should be there. It's normal for a girl at any age. But hugging her mentor, Melinda replied that she didn't need a better friend. Melinda rarely thought about her past. She was gripped by a sticky horror of what could have happened to her if it weren't for Mrs. O'Brien. 5 years had passed. Melinda's career was shaping up much more successfully than her personal life. She was still unmarried. This fact didn't bother her at all, but it worried Mrs. O'Brien. Darling, you're too careless about your future, she said to Melinda one evening over tea. Why do you think so? The girl asked in surprise. You're 27. It's time to think about marriage and children. Years are passing by. It's time to start having babies. I'll give you 1 more year. Exactly 1 year. And if you don't solve this problem, we'll go to a sexologist. We'll take tests and see what's wrong with us. The woman said us because she considered it her problem too. Melinda laughed but agreed. If you're also going to take tests, I'm ready. Of course, together, because I can't get married either, she said with a sly smile. Of course, Melinda had men during this time, but it was never right. She had enough of them for 5 to 6 months, and she couldn't stand them anymore. But at work, Melinda was a perfectionist. She strived for everything to be perfect. She was constantly coming up with things for her little patients. She arranged for the adjacent room to be connected to her office. There she created a nice play area with a carpet on the floor, a TV playing cartoons. Basically, everything a child needed to visit the doctor without stress. Today was not a very good day. Her shift was the second one, and they scheduled a meeting where everyone had to be present at 12 o'clock. So Melinda worked from morning until evening. Entering the clinic, she saw him, Matthew. She opened her mouth in surprise. It seemed to her that he had grown taller, broader in the shoulders. In a perfectly fitting suit and, as always, shoes polished to a shine. He didn't notice her. He was focused on the papers he was flipping through while walking and talking to a man walking alongside him. What is he doing here? Melinda thought. It was like a meeting with the past. He seemed to be from childhood, from that best time when all they had to do was study well. How long ago that was? More than 5 years ago. Quickly changing clothes, Melinda went up to the conference hall and took her seat at her favorite spot, behind the column. The hall quickly filled up with doctors. Everyone looked around as if searching for someone, and whispered to each other. Melinda caught this mysterious mood. She didn't like such surprises, but pulling herself together, she decided to wait for the official announcements. When everyone had gathered, and silence fell in the hall, the chief doctor of the clinic, Mr. Klaus, came out and greeted everyone before bringing them up to speed. What do you think distinguishes the medical business from others? He paused for a moment, surveyed everyone, and smiled. I knew you wouldn't answer that question, but I'll tell you it's primarily profitability and the high complexity of the services provided. Our esteemed Mr. Stivers, who is stepping down as director, was very knowledgeable about business projects based on expertise in economics, psychology, personnel management, and other areas. But due to recent regulations, the director must not only have that, but also have a medical education. Therefore, starting tomorrow, Matthew Fisher will assume the duties of the director of the Avicenna Medical Center. He's a young, ambitious, talented surgeon. He graduated from medical school and has been working in the clinic for 5 years, saving lives in the operating room. Please welcome him warmly. On stage stood a handsome, tall, impeccably dressed young man. Matthew inspired admiration. His achievements over the past 5 years as a top-tier surgeon evoked envy in some and admiration in others. He had few friends and preferred the company of like-minded individuals. Transitioning to a private clinic and performing expensive surgeries enabled him to buy his own apartment and car. Always well-groomed, clean-shaven, and stylishly attired, he stood out from the crowd. He lived deliberately, so nothing in his life happened by chance or without planning. He still didn't smoke or drink. Melinda cautiously peered out from her hiding spot. So, his dream has come true, she thought to herself. Matthew was saying something, and all the women listened to him rapturously. He knew Melinda worked in this clinic, and now, speaking automatically, he scanned the room for her but couldn't find her. I'll call her to me and ask why she didn't come to the meeting, he thought, not stopping his speech. She listened to what he was saying. The rapid development of medicine, the emergence of new services on the market, innovative materials, and equipment will require me to monitor the market and analyze the competitiveness of our medical center with others. But I will also have to engage in self-development regularly, be active, and progressive in views and decisions. Because these 3 basic parameters characterize an effective manager. She got distracted and looked at the clock, counting exactly an hour since the meeting began. Melinda looked out the window while Matthew continued to speak. Finally, she saw everyone standing up, and she also got up to go to her office. Someone approached the new director to get acquainted, while she hurried to leave the room. But he still noticed her. So, someone was sitting somewhere, as quiet as a mouse, he thought, smiling. She had exactly an hour until her next appointment. So Melinda decided to have some coffee. After preparing all the instruments for the appointment, she glanced at the clock again, then opened the door to her office and came face to face with Matthew, who was heading her way. Well, hello, Melinda. Good to see you, he said. Hello, Matthew. So your dream has come true, she replied. Yes, I'm visionary. How are you? How's life? He asked. I'm good, she replied. And that's it. Well, if you're wondering whether I'm married, the answer is no. I still live in the same place. Mrs. O'Brien is alive and well, thank God. So, that's all. It's been 5 years since we last saw each other, and there's nothing much to tell. And sorry, Matthew, but patients have already arrived for me. After letting the visitors in, Melinda closed the door, and he thought about her again. Melinda was the most beautiful woman he had ever met. It was hard to imagine being with Ellen after seeing Melinda again. In these 5 years, Matthew had never met a woman he wanted more or who suited him better than Melinda. He had a choice to go to either the Avicenna Clinic or Grace. The latter was larger and paid better, but upon learning that Melinda worked at the Avicenna Clinic, he came here without hesitation. Now he could see her every day. A call distracted him from thoughts of Melinda. He had just thought of Ellen, and she was already calling. "Hello, darling Matthew, I asked you not to call me that." He replied coldly. "Sorry," she said. After that, he hung up the phone and turned it off. Ellen was the daughter of a friend of Matthew's mother, and they dreamed of becoming relatives. "But what does it have to do with me?" the son asked his mother. "Matthew, she's a good girl, very domestic. Mom, she should first and foremost be someone I like, not you. We've talked about this 1,000 times, and if you don't stop trying to find me a bride, I won't come to your Sunday dinners anymore." That's where their duel ended, but it would repeat itself in a couple of months. Ellen once came over when her parents weren't home, and Matthew had to entertain her. Over those 2 hours, the girl imagined many things that weren't there and began to suffer. But Matthew didn't give in, never invited her to his apartment or attempted to court her. However, sometimes she reminded him of herself in such an innocent way. For the rest of the day until evening, Matthew was busy sorting through papers and getting acquainted with his affairs. When he looked at the clock, it was already 8 in the evening. "It's time to relax," he thought, and began to get ready, wrapping his neck with a huge white scarf and draping a long black coat over his shoulders. He descended to the parking lot and got into his car. Only now did he realize how tired he was. Starting the engine, the car silently began to move but stopped abruptly. Melinda emerged from the clinic, glanced around, and immediately turned the corner toward the metro. "Melinda," Matthew called out. "Hop in. I'll give you a ride." She hesitated for a moment, then got into the car. "Where's your white Mercedes?" he asked. "My dad's using it. I bought myself a black BMW. I like this car. I live separately from my parents. As soon as I started working, I rented an apartment, and 2 years ago, I finally managed to buy my own. And just last year, I bought the car. And what about you? Still renting out your apartment?" "No. When I started working, I renovated it, got rid of all the old furniture, except for my grandmother's old armchair as a keepsake. They restored it for me, and now it's in her room. But I live with Mrs. O'Brien. She's over 70 now, and I love her dearly. I help her with everything she did for me. Yes, she's a heroic woman. Smart, insightful, a real psychologist. Can I go up and say hello to her? She'll be delighted. Mrs. O'Brien is a sociable woman, and she clearly misses it now. Let's go buy a cake." Matthew liked the idea, and soon they were standing again in front of the door that once opened and invited him inside like a jealous hero. Today, Melinda opened the door, but Mrs. O'Brien greeted him. She had visibly aged, become very small, but still held her head high and her back straight. "Hello, Mr. Othello. Or have you become another hero?" she asked with her signature smile. "You tell me which. I'm a hero now." "Good evening, dear Mrs. O'Brien. It's wonderful to see you. You look lovely, as always." "Thank you. You also look lovely. And as always, your shoes are polished to perfection. I've always liked that. Come in." She took the cake from Melinda's hands and went to the kitchen. The evening turned out to be family-oriented. He didn't want to leave this cozy kitchen, to leave this pleasant company, but it was nearing 11 p.m., and it would be indecent to stay longer. "I have to go," he said, showing his regret. "You need to rest, and Melinda has work tomorrow. Come by more often, Matthew," the old lady said. "With pleasure," he replied, looking at Melinda. and he left. Well, Melinda, I can say that nothing has changed in his attitude toward you. He loves you very much, but he has changed. He's matured. You can even see his toned body under his shirt. He's become serious. I like his thoughts about life. They're surprising in their boldness. But it's clear what he wants. Melinda sipped her tea and didn't look at the woman. Lost in her thoughts. Are you lost in thought? The woman asked, embracing Melinda's shoulders. I am. Do you think he's my destiny? Whether he's your destiny or not, it's up to you to decide. You know him well, and he loves you. But then you have to take risks and make decisions. Without that, life is dull, and you're alone. You need to take the reins of control at the most critical moment. You two make such a beautiful couple. Kissing Melinda on the forehead, she went to bed. The morning turned out to be chaotic. Both women overslept, not hearing their alarms. Melinda jumped up, ran straight into the shower, quickly got dressed, and dashed out onto the street. But upon hearing a prolonged honk, she glanced back. Matthew was waving at her, inviting her into the car. Overslept? He asked. Yeah, it really happens to me. Thanks. You really saved me. I have a lot of little patients today. They arrived 5 minutes before the start of the workday. By Melinda's office, the kids were already making noise. After washing her hands and changing, she invited a little girl and her mom into the office. By noon, she had seen all her patients and decided to have some coffee. She was just finishing the last sip of her coffee when there was a knock on the door. Come in. It was the new director, but an old acquaintance. It was Matthew. I wanted to invite you to lunch, he said. No, I'll be going home soon. Melinda, I wanted to talk to you about restructuring the clinic. I have some ideas, and I have some too, and I'd be happy to share them with you. He couldn't hide his joy upon hearing her response. Listen, let's grab something to eat after your work, and you can tell me everything, he suggested. Or maybe we could visit us again. My golden Mrs. O'Brien would be delighted, she proposed. I'd love to. I'll wait for you in the parking lot in an hour. An hour later, they were already speeding down the familiar road, heading towards where a delicious lunch and warm reception awaited them. After lunch, Mrs. O'Brien wanted to lie down to not disturb the two talking. No one started the conversation first, but eventually Matthew spoke up. Melinda, I'm listening to you very attentively. I've always wondered why our clinic doesn't have a hospital ward. We do the most difficult part, diagnostics, which is sometimes even harder than surgery, because a correctly diagnosed condition is 50% success. So, we do the toughest part, and then send the patient to another clinic. And they never come back to us. They go where they had the surgery done, and all the credit goes to the other clinic. Why such injustice? We can help the person from diagnosis to full recovery after the surgery. And yet, there's no hospital ward. We have everything for it. Where do you propose to place it? I would move the administrative ward and the cafe to the ground floor, and dedicate the entire freed-up floor to the hospital ward. Placing the cafe on the ground floor would be much more profitable because parents would buy something for themselves and their children. The hospital ward is essential. In a year or two, you'll lose your surgical skills. That would be a shame. You can find a good director, but a surgeon like you is heaven sent. Besides, it would allow you to maintain your skills by performing surgeries. To be honest, I never even thought about the cafe, but I did consider the hospital ward when I first joined here. So, our opinions align on this matter. I need to prepare to persuade Mr. Klaus about the hospital ward. It's going to be tough, Melinda said. I know, but if we succeed, our clinic's name will be on everyone's lips. Thank you so much. I always knew you were clever, but today I'm convinced of it once again. Happy to help. Let me work you out, Melinda said. She put on her jacket, and they stepped out. Near the car, he asked, maybe we could go somewhere. I've missed this. She looked into his eyes and realized that such charm isn't acquired. It's innate. Either they have a secret to immediately captivate others. Matthew, okay, sorry, no, you didn't get it. I agree, thanks. Where do you want to go? Let's visit the places of our youth. I still remember your tours. He hugged her so tenderly and whispered, I'll be glad to remember everything. Then kissed her cheek and drove away. Mrs. O'Brien stood by the window, watching Melinda. Maybe now she'll be happy, the woman thought. They suit each other very well. Entering the apartment, Melinda quietly went into the bathroom and closed the door behind her. Seeing her flushed face in the mirror, she smiled to herself, rinsed her face with warm water, and asked herself, are you satisfied? He's here again. So what? I've never had any action in my life before him. It's as if I've been waiting for him, she thought, covering her face with her hands as tears welled up. Is everything okay? Mrs. O'Brien asked. Yes. Why wouldn't it be? Matthew is Matthew. He's already setting up a date for me. Don't you want to go? I'll go. And then I'll decide what I want. You yourself said we need to take risks. You're a good student. I'm trying. I wonder why I always ended up with the wrong men. Why haven't I been lucky enough to meet the one for a lifetime? I just want to feel loved. Dear, if everyone knew the answers to these questions, there wouldn't be unhappy people in the world. And that eternal question, why me? Everyone asks themselves who haven't found their happiness. Do you like Matthew's attitude towards you more now? Yes, I feel calm with him now. He speaks seriously, thoughtfully. I like that, unlike before. Previously, it was just the love of a boy. Unjustified jealousy, emotional outbursts, passion. Why do we say that first love often doesn't end up in something serious? That's why it's the love of a boy, not a manual. His love hasn't gone anywhere, and it's already the feelings of an adult man, and you like it. It's strange that his boyish love hasn't cooled for you, even over time. It speaks to his constancy, a commendable male trait. You both have matured, learned to distinguish primitive youthful passions from adult feelings, and these feelings are long-lasting. I feel it. Mrs. O'Brien finished her speech. Sounds encouraging. Let's see how our date goes. It will go well, I'm sure. They saw each other intermittently all week. Matthew was busy, torn in different directions, trying to do everything. Sometimes he called Melinda on the phone to check on her. Both were looking forward to Saturdays. The schedule was extensive, so Matthew picked up Melinda at 11 a.m. Mrs. O'Brien wished them a good time, waved to them from the window, and went to call Frank. His son was born, and he wanted to see his grandson. The evening was winding down, and Matthew could see that Melinda was tired. The final item on the agenda was dinner at the panoramic restaurant. Seeing such beauty, Melinda couldn't hide her emotions. The stunning city delighted their eyes. They talked, gazed at the evening cityscape, and when the sounds of music played by a small orchestra filled the air, Matthew invited Melinda to dance. She felt nervous, saying she hadn't danced in a long time. But Matthew already pulled her close, placing his hand on her slender waist, leading her in the dance. Without taking his eyes off her, he inhaled the familiar scent of her hair. I see you enjoy dancing, she said. I do, but only with you, he replied. You lead beautifully, Matthew. I never would have thought you were such a good dancer, Melinda said, laughing when she saw his pleased expression. You're like a child. You love it when you're praised. Everyone does, he said, pulling her closer. I missed you so much all this time, but I didn't want to rush you or annoy you. I was so afraid that you'd get married during this time, but thank God you're still single. Melinda, marry me. How long can we just be friends? We're adults, and our feelings have stood the test of time. Mine certainly have. Taking out a velvet blue box from his pocket, he got down on one knee and proposed again, and everyone around them started clapping, completely surprising Melinda. Without looking away, she gazed into his eyes and suddenly uttered words that stirred his soul. I agree. I don't know what will come of this, but I want to try, she said, smiling. This moment will stay in my memory for a lifetime. I'll tell our children about it. Matthew laughed with happy laughter and kissed her. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time and responded to his kiss with all the tenderness and passion. Melinda arrived home well past midnight, and Matthew didn't let her go for a long time. Maybe you'll move in with me now. We'll file for marriage tomorrow, he said. Don't rush, Mr. Matthew, she replied. We've wasted so much time together. All right, I'll talk to Mrs. O'Brien. We need to prepare her. I'll be waiting. Meeting Matthew's parents wasn't the most pleasant Sunday event. The luxurious mansion seemed too ostentatious to Melinda. She looked at Matthew's parents, who were waiting for them at the gate, and she didn't feel like going in. No, she wasn't scared, but she felt that today wouldn't be easy. If only she could close her eyes and then open them to find the introduction already over. With Matthew's help, she got out of the car, adjusted her coat, and put on a smile. Mom, Dad, meet Melinda, my future wife. She's a pediatrician. We work at the same clinic. Matthew introduced. Hello, Tamala and Michael. Nice to meet you, Melinda greeted. Hello, his father replied through gritted teeth. Come in. The first person Matthew noticed inside was Ellen. What is she doing here? He asked, turning to his parents. Then, looking at Melinda, he said, Melinda, meet Ellen, my mom's friend's daughter, and that's it. Nothing else you want to add? Ellen retorted. No, I don't, Matthew replied. It's me they want to see as your wife. And you know it. Ellen said. Mom, what's going on? Let's go, Melinda. Let them stay with who they want to see as their relative. I didn't promise anything, Matthew said. His mother's expression showed that she didn't like the situation herself, because it was Michael who was the mastermind behind this spectacle. Son, wait. Ellen will leave now, right, honey? Tamala said. Both women were in a terrible position because of the father's desire to do things his way. Finally, they entered the mansion's hall. Melinda noticed that the house was richly furnished, expensive, but tasteless. As they worked inside, it felt like the owners took pride in their creation. It upheld their status as one of the city's wealthiest families and stroked their egos. Michael loved such luxury. His wife, Matthew's mother, Tamala, was more modest, perhaps because she had bathed in this wealth since childhood. But her husband liked everyone to see how lavishly they lived. Do you like the house? Michael asked, ready to hear praises. Melinda didn't pretend and express admiration for what she didn't like. It's your home, so the most important thing is that you like it. Dinner was dull, uninteresting, with no one trying to salvage the situation. And when Melinda said it was time for them to leave, everyone sighed in relief. We'll send you an invitation to the wedding, Matthew said as they said their goodbyes. Okay, son, thank you, Tamala replied for both of them. They drove home in silence. Matthew took Melinda's hand. Sorry for such a reception. Dad's hopeless, he said. It's okay, darling, she replied. They sent out invitations to everyone they wanted to see at the main celebration of their lives. Clark also received one. Getting it, he really wanted to see Melinda, the bride, but he decided it wasn't right because she had remained a desirable woman for him. He had been married for half a year now, but not to Vicky. She didn't pass the probationary period, and they broke up with a scandal, and Clark didn't regret ending all relations with her. His wife became a modest woman, the cousin of his friend. Her name was also Melinda, and even her character was similar to Melinda's. Clark was now expecting a child. The doctors said it would be a son. He had always dreamed of a family and children, of quiet family evenings, so his dream had come true. Matthew's parents arrived at the wedding among the last guests, congratulated them, but didn't stay long. Mrs. O'Brien also didn't stay long. She had been falling ill more often, and Melinda dreaded the thought of leaving her alone. But Matthew refused to live in her apartment. For the first time in many years, Mrs. O'Brien spent the night alone. She thought about her husband, about Frank, about her little grandson, and of course, about her Melinda, who had brightened her loneliness all these years. Her husband hadn't visited her dreams for a long time, ever since Melinda moved in with her. But tonight, she wanted to meet him in her dreams, talk to him, ask him if she hadn't stayed too long here, if he missed her. But to do that, she needed to fall asleep, and sleep just wouldn't come. She had taken care of her will a long time ago, distributing everything she thought was fair. She left the apartment to Melinda, and everything in it, paintings, icons, antique porcelain dishes, to be divided among Frank and Melinda's children. Of course, she hoped to live long enough to see these little ones, but if the Lord didn't grant her that opportunity, she had already decided, and her will would have to be fulfilled. Soon Mrs. O'Brien really fell asleep, and her husband came to talk to her from beyond. "No, dear, it's not time for you to come to me yet. The time hasn't come. You did everything right with the will. Melinda has become like a daughter to you, a gift from the Lord. I included Melinda's children in the will, but I don't know if I'll live to see her grandchildren. You'll see them, you'll meet them, and then I'll greet you. Take care of yourself. Don't rush to me. The Lord knows when it's time for us to meet." She wanted to hug him, but he disappeared, vanished like smoke. She slept long and peacefully. A smile played on her lips. She was happy with the meeting with her husband. The newlyweds went back to work. Each of them continued with their respective duties. Melinda with her young patients, and her husband with his directorial responsibilities. He managed to talk to Mr. Klaus and convinced him of the necessity to open a hospital ward. Repairs were underway on the 3rd floor. Furniture and equipment were being delivered. And after a year, the ward was solemnly opened. It was Matthew's victory. Certainly, the workload increased, but the clinic gained recognition. The best specialists wanted to work there, which gave this medical institution a special status. Matthew could operate once or twice a week, which also attracted more patients who wanted treatment specifically at this clinic. When the main tasks were accomplished, Melinda announced her pregnancy. It was as if the baby had been waiting for the right moment to make itself known to its parents. 9 months later, a baby girl was born. The happy parents went to Mrs. O'Brien to show her their daughter. "I've never seen such beautiful children," she said, admiring the little nose and eyes. "What did you name her?" "Sophie. In your honor." "Thank you, Melinda. This is the best gift," she said, wiping tears of joy. After the birth of the child, Melinda had less time to visit Mrs. O'Brien. She called Frank several times, telling him about his mother's poor health. "Frank, you should call her more often. After all, nobody knows how much time we have on this earth." He started calling her more often, and on Sundays, they entertained her together via Skype with the whole family. The woman was happy. Relations with the in-laws warmed up with the birth of the granddaughter. Tamala adored Sophie and often asked to have her for a visit. Even the perpetually grumpy grandfather, Michael, enjoyed playing with his granddaughter. Matthew's parents no longer ignored Melinda, but they didn't embrace her either. She was fine with that. When Sophie turned 3 and Mrs. O'Brien turned 80, they celebrated at Mrs. O'Brien's home. Frank congratulated her with his family. He had a second son, and it was evident that the family was happy. The hostess wasn't feeling quite well, so Melinda often asked Matthew to allow her to spend time with Mrs. O'Brien. One day, Melinda finally convinced him to live at Mrs. O'Brien's. Seeing her pleading eyes, he agreed. Mrs. O'Brien perked up, feeling better because she realized that she was needed by someone. When Sophie started frequently mentioning her sister, the parents began to consider having a second child. Melinda was afraid to start all over again, but Matthew wanted a son. When Sophie was 5 years old, they had a son and named him after his grandfather, Michael. Michael loved his grandson dearly and was very happy. Once, when staying overnight at Mrs. O'Brien's, Melinda overheard her talking to Frank. "Son, I'm not feeling well. I don't know how much time I have left. I've written a will. The apartment will go to Melinda. She has 2 children. And I want to divide all the antiques among the 4 grandchildren. From her mother's responses, Melinda understood that Frank wanted to refuse everything. No, son, you can't do that. This is a lot of money. A lot. Your children will need it. When I'm gone, you should still come home. Take what your father worked so hard for and spent so much money on. Don't thank me. You're my son. And I love you. Hugs. Call me son. Hearing all this, Melinda became scared. She couldn't imagine that her beloved mentor would no longer be in this apartment. She had done so much good for her, invested so much of her soul and knowledge. She didn't need anything from this will. If Frank came, let him take everything. It was his father who had gathered all this beauty. So why should she take it? Several times, Matthew admitted Mrs. O'Brien to his hospital ward for a couple of weeks. After that, she would come out lively, and it would last for half a year. The last time they saw her was on her birthday. She turned 85. Sophie read her a poem, bringing Mrs. O'Brien to tears, and Michael sang her a song. When the amateur concert was over, the woman wanted to lie down. Melinda, I'm tired. I'll go rest. They all stayed to spend the night with her, and in the morning, she was gone. Luckily, Matthew was there. Melinda couldn't have handled it on her own. Even Frank flew in for the funeral to say goodbye to his mother. 6 months later, Melinda summoned a notary and read the will, which she already knew about. Can I decline all of this in favor of Frank? She asked. Melinda, Mrs. O'Brien was a very wise woman and psychologist. Over the years, she anticipated your question, so she personally wrote you a letter. She asked me to have you read it in my presence. Read it, and then decide what you want to do, he said, handing her a sealed envelope. With trembling hands, Melinda opened it. Dear, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm already with my husband. I've always been happy with him, so don't worry. You understand that we're all mortal. I know you're a good person and will raise your children right. You must give them the best of what you know and can do yourself. Remember how I taught you to believe in yourself. It was your own perseverance that made you a wonderful doctor and won the heart of the most handsome and enviable groom. Do you know why? Because you believed in yourself. Pass this on to your children. I know you are crying now, but I'm not writing this for that. I'm asking you. No, I'm ordering you not to refuse what rightfully belongs to you. It's for my grandchildren. The apartment will be useful to you too. When Sophie gets married and wants to live in that apartment, I'll be glad. Don't think I shortchanged Frank. He got a lot after his father's death. I even gave him more than he deserved. So everything I wrote in the will, you must fulfill. Understood? After reading the last word, Melinda nodded, as if Mrs. O'Brien could see her. Did you understand everything? The notary asked. Yes, I take back my words. Melinda replied, tears streaming down her face. Good, I'll contact Frank myself. The notary said. 6 months later, Frank arrived, and he and Melinda divided everything as Mrs. O'Brien wanted. They didn't see each other anymore, but Frank would occasionally call to wish her Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday. Melinda sold her apartment because she no longer needed it. Matthew had built a house, as Mrs. O'Brien had wanted. Sophie lived in her apartment after entering college. Although all the antiques moved to Melinda and Matthew's home, Michael, upon entering college, continued Grandpa Michael's business. Grandma didn't live to see his triumph, but Grandpa was proud of him. Melinda never regretted her marriage. Although Matthew's character became tougher with the years and his profession left its mark, she knew how to calm him down, and he always loved only her.